Shortly after I fell asleep, gravity pulled me back. At first, I panicked, but then realized this was how it felt to fall through my inner realms. Instead of fighting it, I allowed it to happen. A heartbeat later, I came to an abrupt stop and found myself in my soul realm. I glanced around, trying to make sense of what was happening. The haze that filled this area was thicker than before, and the sound of snoring had vanished. I mean, I didn't use my meditation skill, so I wonder what caused this to happen. The sound of nails scratching the ground caught my attention, and my eyes shot to the location. I paused to figure out what the noise could be from. It sounded like a small creature that was scrambling across a tile floor. I kept my hands ready as I prepared myself for whatever was to come. I may be in my soul realm, but I also had to face the possibility that some sort of magic could invade it. However, much to my surprise, a small reptilian head poked out from the haze. A pair of black eyes stared at me, and its head tilted to the side. I stared at it for a moment, shocked to see what looked to be a baby dragon inside of where my soul should be. We shared a gaze as I tried to figure out why this was a thing. I mean, I understood that my class was called the Dragon of Asteria and that I chose the Dragon's Soul Path, but I don't remember signing adoption papers. I squatted down and tapped the floor in front of me. Come here. I cooed out softly as I quickly thought over stuff. That would explain the snoring I heard when I was in earlier, though I highly doubt that such a loud noise could come from such a small creature. The little dragon tilted its head as it stared at me before it stepped forward. The haze parted around it like a sea, revealing a lithe body lined with deep vibrant purple scales that hardly reflected the ambient lighting. A small crest of 7 horns stretched from the back of the small head. The little dragon stepped forward before it pressed itself as low as possible. It wiggled on its haunches, and I saw a small tail flick behind it as it was getting ready to pounce. Ah, so this was the game that we were going to play? I tapped my finger once more and slowly dragged it back. The dragon zeroed in on my finger before it pounced. The little guy was fast, but I was faster. I quickly moved my finger away and stepped back, giving the little guy some space. The hatchling didn't seem too thrilled at the fact that it got tricked and stepped back, giving me a look of indignation. What's the wrong, little guy? I asked as I squatted down once more and tapped the ground in front of me. The question is, what am I supposed to do with a dragon? However, before I could do anything, a strange presence overtook me. I felt the hairs on my head stand up straight, and my heart skipped a beat. A primal fear gripped my heart tightly as my breath caught in my throat. The surrounding air seemed to grow heavier with each passing second as if it was trying to force me to my knees. I gasped for air as I struggled against whatever seemed to try to make me bow, at least until the sound of shoes smacking into tile resounded in my ear, and a deep sultry voice broke the silence. Ah, you must be Calixa. I must say, you are quite the celebrity right now. The voice, though alien, was laced with an accent I immediately recognized as being British, or at least something close to it. The air seemed to redouble in its efforts to push me to my knees, but I refused to budge. Instead, I fought against it and clenched my fist. Who are you? I hissed out through my teeth. My name is Mitter. It's a pleasure to meet you. Through the haze, another being materialized. This time, a male was dressed in an extravagant back 3-piece suit, topped with a glittering silver tie. His short hair was a saturated black that seemed to gulp at the light. What visible parts of his flesh I could see seemed to be the color of caramel and utterly flawless. A soft smirk crossed his face, parting his lips slightly, revealing a mouth full of pointed canines. I stared at him, struggling against the weight of the air as it pressed down on me. Who the fuck are you, and why are you in my soul realm? I gritted my teeth and struggled once more as the surrounding air seemed to redouble its efforts. Mitter chuckled quietly and reached up to remove the pair of sunglasses he was wearing, revealing a set of amber-colored eyes that looked as if they came straight from a lizard. Now, darling. Please don't get too hasty. I won't hurt you. I took a deep breath, ignoring the fear that screamed at me as I struggled with the presence that was smothering me. Then why are you here? Instead of answering me, the man walked over to me and bent over. Before I answer your questions, darling, I'm going to have to ask you to bow. His words were drawn out and playful, but under it all, I felt a hint of bloodthirst that seemed to simmer just under the surface. I refuse. I didn't care who or what I was standing before. But I would never bow to anyone, especially not in my realm. Is that so? A serpentine tongue flickered from his mouth as the air smashed into me with even more force than I thought possible. It slammed into my back with the strength of a freight train, yet I held on with everything that I could. I mentally activated every single skill that came to mind that would help me in this situation. My legs felt as if they were about to shatter from the sheer amount of weight that was assailing me. Yes. I met his eyes, daring him to hit me again. I knew I wouldn't handle much more than this, but I was trying to prove a point. Ah, I like you already, darling. Mitter snapped a pair of ring-clad fingers, and the force vanished instantaneously. I sucked in a deep breath and caught myself as I fell forward, surprised by the sudden shift of force. I cleared my throat as I straightened up and adjusted my cloak. While I was pissed, I wouldn't risk pissing off whoever this was, especially since he was in my soul realm. Now, who are you? I asked as I smoothed out the front of my cloak. Mitter. The Lord of Dragons at your service. The strange man gave me a large flourish as the air around me flickered and fell away like grains of sand, revealing what looked like a regular park. Flocks of birds soared through the air, and the wind blew softly through the trees and through the fields of short grass. For once, the ambient smell of death vanished and was replaced by that of freshly cut grass. Something that I haven't smelt in so long. I eyed the man warily as he snapped his fingers, and dozens of tree roots broke from the ground and quickly intertwined with one another, forming a skeletal outline of a bench. I stood there, watching as Mitter walked over and took a seat. What did I get myself into? Why is there a man in my soul proclaiming himself as a Lord of Dragons here? Come now, little godling, we have much to discuss and very little time to do so. Mitter crossed his legs and pointed at the spot next to him on the bench. I'll stand for now. I crossed my arms and stood across from him. It was for the best if I kept my space. At least for now, until I figured out what he wanted. So be it then. As for why I am here, it's simple. I came to deliver your soul summon and meet you. It's been a while since Tenneth received a new godling who broke into the second tier, especially so soon, and an outworlder to boot. Mitter stretched his arms out on both sides of the bench as he spoke and bobbed his foot to some unseen rhythm. Godling, huh? I guess that's something that I haven't really thought about. Really, I read all the menus and whatnot, but I guess it didn't really sink in until now. I mean, I don't really feel all that different. Ah, please don't lose that humble nature. Most beings that become gods become insufferably full of themselves. Though I guess I'm not one to speak. I am a dragon, after all. His long snake-like tongue flickered out and ran across his teeth as a wide grin crossed his face. Those words swam through my head, as for once I actually paid it some mind. I'm a god or something akin to it. I stared down at my hands as the thoughts swirled around. Maybe I shouldn't think too far into it. Already, the thoughts of what I could do seemed to gnaw at me, telling me I could do anything that I wanted. You say I'm a godling, yet I don't feel like one. Some doubts that had built up slipped out of my mouth as I looked inwards. Most don't. Besides, you are at the very bottom of the totem pole, especially on Tenneth. I'm just elated to see a new face. The great game isn't as fun when you've fought the same people for eons. I clenched my fist and tore my attention away from my hands. Great game? Also, I've always wondered, how did I get to Tenneth, and how did I become a domain god? Finally, after all this time, I could have some questions answered. Mitter gazed at me with his amber eyes before he shrugged. I can't tell you much about where you came as I know very little. But, while I have time, you may ask some of your questions, and I'll consider answering them. I crossed my arms as I waited for him to tell me. Mitter stared at me for a moment, bobbing his foot before he spoke. Well, you came into contact, either with a dead god or a divine spark. Though judging by how you smell, it was a long-dead god. Once you did that, the divine spark changed you. I thought back to shortly before I woke up here. I remembered the strange sphere and the area where I found it. It was a set of ruins. Now that I think about it, though, I didn't even really realize what it was in my exhausted haze. But really, I couldn't even think of a god that focused on life on Earth, though I was sure that there was one. I see. So, I guess I should ask why I'm on Tenneth then. Mitter looked at me and shrugged his shoulders. Who knows, darling? Maybe one of the elder gods decided that the planet that you were on had no need for a godling. I perked up at that, but a whole slew of new questions danced around my mind. Wait, what are elder gods? Well, those are gods who have ascended to another plane of existence and oversee the universe. They are to gods, as you are to us. Beings beyond understanding and thought. Ones who care nothing for the gods that may exist. As he spoke, I felt a headache arrive. Whatever he was saying was beyond me, and it was something that I really didn't want to think about. If it was something that applied to me now, then by all means, but this was a little over my head. As I pinched the bridge of my nose, I replied, okay, so if I ascend here, Does that mean that I can go back home? Mitter bobbed his foot and gave me another smug grin. Of course, darling. Once you reach your apotheosis, you will be able to. However, would you even want to go back? The brief elation at his words quickly faded as doubt came in. Was it even worth going back to Earth? Can I bring everything that I made here? Mitter shrugged. I don't see why you can't. It is your domain, after all. I suppose that would be a bridge I would cross once I got there. I mean, I had a whole slew of questions that I wasn't sure how to answer. Well, that's good to hear. Anyway, you said you were here about giving me my summon? I steered the questions into another topic since I wasn't sure how much longer the dragon would entertain me. At least I got a handful of them answered so far. Better to chip away at them now, than let them linger. Ah yes. He snapped his finger, and a second later, the small black dragon jumped from a bush nearby. The bloodied corpse of a squirrel clenched between its teeth. However, what I come with is more a gift of goodwill than anything else. I stared at Mitter, trying to judge what he would gain from befriending me. He mentioned something about the Great Game. Before we go any further, what can you tell me about the Great Game? What is there really to talk about? All the gods on Teneth play it, all for the sake of who can pull in the most worshippers. Rather mundane if you ask me, but the ploys can be rather interesting at times. Mitter replied as the small dragon curled up in his lap and stroked its head. So, I'm going to be blunt, then. What's with the gift then? What do you stand to get out of it? I was exhausted from getting used by people for whatever schemes they had. Though I was still annoyed with that adventurer. Thankfully, I pulled it back in my favor, but still. I wasn't pleased with people using me. You are rather on the nose. But I'll humor you. You possess a fragment of a dragon's soul. A small fragment, but a fragment, nonetheless. I come intending to give that fragment life. On paper, that puts you within my domain. However, I have no desire to lord over other deities, so it is more like a peace offering. Whatever course you are on, stay there, and do not interfere with me, and I will leave you be. The playfulness around him seemed to fade once more and was replaced instead with a bloodlust that was palatable. I swallowed dryly and nodded my head. His threat was as clear as day. I had no intention of making any enemies right now. The bloodlust faded, and that same cocky smile appeared on his face. Good, good, I'm glad we can come to an understanding. Anyway, this little guy here will be your familiar from now on. The little dragon that sat on his lap popped its head up and gave me a strange look. I stared at the small dragon and then at Mitter. You expect me to take care of that? How was I supposed to take care of a dragon? Of course, it is your doing, after all. Though I wouldn't stress about it too much, darling, it is an extension of yourself, so there really isn't much you need to do. Mitter snapped his fingers, and the small dragon jumped up and glared at me with indignation. How would I even take care of it? I found myself pinching the bridge of my nose as my stress levels rose once more. Why did this all have to be a pain in my ass? Can't a girl have a break? Simple darling, it's a soulbound summon. All it really needs is to feast off a portion of your soul reserves now and then. It won't hurt you, of course. As Mitter spoke, the little dragon jumped down from the bench and held its little head high as it landed and strutted around me. Isn't that a bad thing, though? No. You just broke through the first stage of soul cultivation, so your soul will regenerate much more quickly. The familiar will grow in strength as you do, but if you want it to keep evolving, keep feeding a portion of your soul. The little dragon sat down in front of me, its black eyes staring at me as if I were inferior to it. Which already annoyed me, but let's be honest. It was a chance to have a pet dragon. I quickly ran through all the possibilities in my head. Having this familiar would be great. It would allow me to protect myself, and it would be a solid addition to Asterian lore. The most significant trade-off would be raising it, which would force me to worry more about my soul, which wasn't a bad thing. After all, this was a vital part of my current class, which I have been neglecting lately. Mostly because of handling things in my domain. How do I take it as my familiar then? You just reach your hand out and push part of your soul into the hatchling. It will take it and awaken itself within you. From there, well, it's a learning experience. I felt myself shudder under his gaze as a strange smile crossed his face. It wasn't his usual self-assured grin, but something that lingered in my mind like an ominous warning. I reached out to the dragon with my medium-clad hand, only to stop a few inches away from its head. Was this really a good idea? I honestly didn't know, but what I knew was that I needed to keep getting stronger. I was already drawing the attention of gods, and if I was drawing their attention, then who knows what else was looking my way. This wasn't just for me anymore, but for everyone that lived within my domain. We were all tied together, and I needed to do my best to make sure I could protect them all. No matter the cost. With one last breath to steel my nerves, I channeled my soul into my hand and placed it onto the hatchling's head. As the world around me flickered, Mitter stood up and walked over to me. It was a pleasure meeting you, Calixa. I will keep an eye on you for now, though we will meet once more in the future. Oh, one last thing, I added a little something into your familiar. Hopefully, you enjoy it. He gave me a condensing wink as he snapped his fingers. A split second later, a force slammed into my chest, throwing me backward and into the abyss. Mother, I demand you awaken at once. A voice bore into my mind, and I opened my bleary eyes. A headache hung just behind my eyelids, and a strange heaviness sat deep within my chest. For a short time, my mind seemed sluggish, wondering who would call me mother in the world. At least until I cracked open an eye and saw a child standing by my bedside. Her arms were crossed, and an impatient gaze was glued to me. She wore a black dress that hung down to her knees and had multiple tiers of ruffles that hung on the flounce of the dress. A small black ribbon with a silvery sheen adorned a small head of flowing raven black. A set of emerald eyes sat on a round face that stared at me with almost startling familiarity. Her flesh was a strange silver color that seemed to scintillate in my bedroom's ambient lighting. The two small canines that poked from just under her lips were the most striking feature. I stared at her for a second longer before my body seemed to wake up. Who are you, and why are you calling me your mother? The little girl next to my bed crossed her arms and turned her head, huffing at me. I didn't realize I was so easily forgettable. I'm your familiar. My heart sank slightly as all of my memories came flowing back to me. Damn you, Mitter. I was expecting a dragon, not a child, to take care of. I thought you were supposed to be a dragon. I sat up on my bed and stretched. The relief was tangible once I figured out what this child was, but so was the stress. I am a dragon, Mother. However, I took this form since I had assumed that it would be the most appealing to you. The little girl huffed at me. Her small arms were crossed, though her dress seemed to swallow her up. I'm sorry, I just wasn't expecting to see, well, a child here. I chuckled nervously while scratching the back of my neck. Anyway, now that you have awakened, I demand immediate affection. The little girl stamped her tiny foot and balled her fist up as she glared at me. Mentally, I sighed, and I could feel a tension headache rising behind the migraine that hung behind my eyelids. This was going to be a pain in the ass. I wasn't ready to be a mother. Damn everyone involved in the string of events that led me here. You do not get to make demands of me, I replied as I stood up and quickly adjusted my cloak. The little girl stood at me, her eyes wide in shock as I walked right past her. But Mother. She huffed as she followed quickly behind me. If you ask nicely, I'll consider it, I told her through a yawn as I walked over to the door that led to my office. But. Her voice lowered slightly as I kept pressing forward. I really didn't feel like dealing with this, but I had to. Say, please, I told her as I opened up the door and held it open as I gestured for her to walk through. She shot daggers at me as I stepped into the room behind her. God, this child was going to be quite the headache. Instead of saying anything, she gave me the silent treatment as she stormed into the room, sat on the ground, and stared at me menacingly. I, however, would not argue with her. I walked over to my desk and pulled the chair out and sat down. So, tell me, do you have a name? She had her cheeks puffed up as she glared at me. Silence hung in the air for quite some time before she eventually spoke. No. However, I demand that you bequeath a name upon me. I sat back in my chair and crossed my arms. Oh, she is spoiled rotten. Now that I think about it, she sounds like a more eloquent feminine version of Mitter. So, here are the rules, right? You do not get to make demands of me. That is not how any of this works. But I cut her off. I had no interest in trying to argue with her. No buts. If you refuse to listen, then you can go back into my soul realm until you decide otherwise. I actually didn't know if I could put her back in there or not, so hopefully, this bluff works. Her eyes widened, and she shook her little head as fast as she could. No, I refuse. I've spent far too long there. Anything but that, I implore you, Mother. I had to suppress the smile that threatened to dance across my face. Finally, I have my first trump card on the matter. Good, then listen to me. Now, first things first. Tell me about you. I kept my voice stern, but really, I had no idea what I was doing. I had never interacted with a child like this before, so it was all too new to me. She looked down and idly ran her fingers across the concrete ground. Well, when you selected the aspect of the dragon, I was inserted into your soul. It allowed me to awaken when you reached the second tier of soul cultivation. However, due to Mitter granting me the polymorph skill, I can take the form of a human. Oh, that bastard. So, this was his doing. If I was stronger, I would beat his ass for doing something like this. I see. Anyway, you mentioned skills. What do you have at your disposal currently? I crossed my arms as I filed through the various thoughts. So, as much as I wanted to deny it, the child is mine. Well, currently, I have a minor soul shout, basic mana manipulation, and a few other things. She replied as she kept tracing her finger across the ground. Poor girl, I think I must have scared her. But wait, why does she get to use magic? I bit my lip and tried to hold back the frustration that simmered just below the surface. So, if you are an aspect of me, why do you get to use magic? Well, I'm still my own being. I'm a blend between an aspect and familiar. Besides Mother, you need mana well to perform any magical feats, and you gave yours up when you took the soul path. That makes sense, I suppose, but now that I am getting answers, more questions are taking their place. I really need to get with that adventurer and see what information I can scrounge up on the outside world. I see. Thank you. I paused as I realized I still had to name her. I couldn't let her run around without one. So now, I just have to name you, huh? She nodded her head but said nothing else. It was good to see that my warning had stuck, for now at least. Something told me it would only last so long. Now, what should I name her? The only thing that I really knew about her was that black seemed to be a significant part of her features. Now, what was something that corresponded with it? It reminded me of nighttime, though I didn't want to default to something as simple as raven or a play on words. No, this had to be something meaningful. As I juggled the various ideas, I thought back to what Mitter had said. I'm a godling. I may not be a god yet, but one day. So why not give her a name that would reflect that? As I spiraled down through many names, one stood out. Nyx. On Earth, she was written as a primordial being. One of the first to spew out of chaos. It would be fitting, I suppose. This will be one of the first here. I had Alessia, Karen, and everyone else, but this dragon was a part of me. Which would make her something extraordinary. I had goals that I was pursuing. Lately a fire had sparked within, and it has been pushing for me to gain more power. I was starting to grow in discontent with what I had. I wanted to name her something that was powerful. So, this name would fit her perfectly. I will name you Nyx. She tore her head from the ground, and she gazed at me with those emerald spheres, and she nodded. Thank you, Mother. As she spoke those words, a set of text appeared on my screen. Your soul familiar has accepted her name. From now on, she will be known as Nyx. I read over the text and nodded my head as I dismissed the notification, but as I did, I realized something. If she is a familiar, she should have a stat tree or something of the sort, right? I brought up my menu and quickly started to look through it, at least until I came across what I needed. Name, Nyx. Race, dragon, soul-bound familiar. Current evolution, dragon hatchling. Soul needed for next evolution, 1000. Level, 1. Health, 100/100 soul, 130/130. Mana, 120/100. Ki, 80 out of 80. Stats. Vitality, 10 Constitution, 7. Strength, 12 Perception, 12. Dexterity, 7 Wisdom, 6. Agility, 7. Intelligence, 12. Skills. Basic Soul Shout I. Basic Rending Claw I. Human Polymorph, Unique. Passive Skills. Basic Soul Manipulation I. Basic Mana Manipulation I. Basic Ki Manipulation I. As I read through her stats, I couldn't help but feel jealous. What even was this? My highest stats when I got here would be equal to her lowest. This honestly wasn't fair. She didn't even have the same stat and character sheet that I did. As I read through the list, though, it made a bit of sense. She wasn't human. So, she would be further ahead than I would be at that level. Which would mean that I would have to train my ass off if I wanted to stay ahead of her. She also had evolutions, so she has the potential to grow further in overall power. Very interesting, though I was curious about how it would affect me. I mean, she was bound to me overall. Ugh, there was so much to figure out. I really wish Google was a thing here sometimes. I cleared my throat and sat back in my chair. There is so much that I need to look into. Looks like I'm going to have to cut back on my sleep a bit for a while. Empress, who is that? Alessia's voice sounded right next to my ear, causing me to almost jump out of my chair and my heart to skip a few beats. For Christ's sake, Alessia, I'm about to put a bell on you, I told her as I adjusted my cloak and cleared my throat and tried to calm my heart. She gave me a weird look as she glided across the room toward her chair. She sat down and crossed her legs and then her arms, looking at me as if she were scolding me for something. I'm sorry, Alessia. I'm just a little overwhelmed right now. This is Nyx. She is my familiar. I sat back in my chair as Nyx decided that this was the moment she wanted to speak again. I think daughter sounds much quainter than a familiar mother. She stood up and brushed off her dress and adjusted her little ribbon. I chuckled nervously as I cast a furtive glance at Alessia, who in turn raised an eyebrow and pursed her lips. I didn't realize that you had a daughter. Ugh, of all things you could have picked up on, you chose that. Neither did I? I laughed nervously as I tried to think of a way out of this. As I opened my mouth to explain to Alessia what happened, Nyx walked over to her. So, you don't smell like mother, nor look like her. What are you? I could breathe a sigh of relief since I had dodged that shit storm for now, but as one goes, another replaces it. However, just as I tried to rein her in, Alessia tilted her head. My name is Alessia. I am the Empress's chosen. Nyx glanced at me and then back at Alessia. Empress? Mother, does that make me a princess? Yes, I suppose that is the case, I murmured to myself as I thought about it. Good, good. Alessia, as the princess, I demand affection. Nyx stood proudly with her head held high, and Alessia shot me a glance with uncertainty etched into it. Nyx. That is highly inappropriate. Come here right now. I hissed through my teeth and pointed at the spot at my feet. The little girl's eyes went wide as she spun at me, the fear evident in her face. But, now, I reiterated and pointed at my feet. This damn child. She is so uppity and bossy. There could be no way that she was my child. She pouted and hung her head as she ambled over to me and sat down. Please don't send me back to the Soul Realm. I don't want to go. Then stop making demands of people, especially those that you don't know. I glared down at her, hoping to get my point across. Silence, however, was the only response that came from her. There was a reason I didn't have kids. I shook my head and glanced over at Alessia. Well, anyway, she is the aspect of the dragon soul within me. She looked at me and then the child once more before she bobbed her head. I understand, Empress. I'm glad you are here, though. As much as I hate to dump Nyx on you, I was hoping you could take her for a little while. I need to plan the expansion and start refitting the troops. I stood up and pulled the chair I was sitting on back to the desk. No, I wasn't trying to get Nyx off of my hands, but there was still so much that I had to do, and trying to entertain Nyx would be far too distracting. Alessia sat there for a few seconds, almost thoughtfully, before standing up. A faint smile quickly appeared on her face before it vanished. Of course, my lady. A flicker of emotion lined her words as she bowed. Nyx, tag along with Alessia for a little while. However, if I even hear that you were misbehaving, I will send you back to my soul realm for a while. Do you understand? I laced my words with sternness as I stared at her. The little girl stood up, and she nodded her head. Of course, mother, I won't disappoint you. Good, now, go. Alessia, take care of her, please. Let me know if she acts up. I sat down and interlaced my fingers as I brought my gaze upon Alessia. I trust her, so I know nothing will happen to Nyx, but this was also something that I knew I couldn't pawn her off all the time. A childhood of neglect really hammered home that I refused to be like my parents. Alessia gave me one last bow before she gestured for Nyx to follow. Instantly, her shame seemed to have melted away as she skipped out of the room, right behind Alessia. Please, God, don't make me regret this. As they vanished from view, I glanced down at my notebook and pinched the bridge of my nose. This was going to be so very stressful. I glanced through my menus and saw that a plethora of notifications had built up, though I was much too busy to even pay them attention when I woke up. Let's take a look and see what has happened. Congratulations! You have unlocked T3 mobs. Dark wraiths, the darkness that they once wielded in life now permeates these beings and drips from their very souls, giving them new flesh. They lurk in the shadows, hunting their prey with uncanny ease. Poltergeist, an angry spirit that is tethered to a location. They are invisible to the naked eye and can only interact with the living through the environment. Skeletal abominations, these skeletons have learned how to manipulate their bodies into various shapes. Whites, a zombie that has lived for a sufficient amount of time evolves into a far more intelligent being. Its body reacts faster, and its body is more dexterous than its counterparts. Its presence is fear-instilling, and any slain by it are turned into zombies. It no longer requires flesh, instead, it saps the soul from its foes. Plus 1000 essence for unlocking at least 3 T3s. I bobbed my head as I read over the list. Dark wraiths seem to be interesting. From what I read, undead that uses dark magic can turn into them. Poltergeists felt a little underwhelming, but I think that might be because of how they are portrayed on Earth, though I'm sure I could find a good use for them within the domain. Skeletal abominations seemed like a much evolved version of the Reaver and the horror variants. The last one is the Whites. I don't think I know anything about them as I thought about it. The bit about them requiring souls instead of flesh seemed a little scary, but they would be a powerful addition to the domain. I sat back and started looking through my menu, trying to sort through everything before spawning in any of the new undead. It's been a while, and I really have neglected to do this. As I sorted through everything, I came across a few things that I had missed. The first thing was the experience bank. Apparently, if I don't have a hand in killing adventures directly, any experience they give off when they die gets stored here. Well, at least part of it, the rest becomes essence that flows back into the domain after splitting the victors. There was also a tab for stored magic variants that I didn't know how I missed but did. So far, there was dark, fire, and wind magic that I could grant to mobs. Which was a bit irritating to me. Even the zombies could use magic, but here I was, sitting here, only able to manipulate my soul. I couldn't help but feel jealous at that. Perhaps I should pester that adventurer a bit more, see what information he can scrounge up for me, and see if I can fix this condition. With a sigh, I dismissed the screens. I didn't want to consume the banked experience just yet, since I still wanted to bring up all my proficiencies and get a new batch of titles. I still wanted to get stronger, and if cashing in all this banked experience screwed that up, then I didn't want it. My headache thankfully seemed to be fading away slightly, though I had a feeling that it would be back soon enough. But since I could finally think straight, let's see what this new undead are. I glanced over at my essence bar and saw that I was sitting on just under 10,000 essence, though the required amount to hit the third level had doubled. I now needed 50,000. If that was the way it would be, then the next level would be 100,000. This was going to be a pain. Otherwise, it would take me an eternity to get where I needed to go. Thank God I decided to set up a trade deal with that adventurer. Now then, on to the summoning. First, let's see what the Dark Wraith was. I opened up my menu and quickly selected the mob. I felt my heart drop a bit when I saw it cost well over 350 essence points. That was far more than any mob at my disposal so far. The summoning rune appeared on the floor and filled my room with a deep red ominous light. The rune quickly spun as a dark figure rose from the ground like a vengeful spirit. Its entire body was shrouded in darkness that seemed to pulse and flicker in the lighting of my office. On both of its hands were a set of 5 claws that seemed to glitter evilly in the light. Thick globules of shadow dripped from its claws as if they were freshly spilled pen ink. A veil of shadows obscured its face that was so dense that even light couldn't seem to pierce it. The Dark Wraith hovered in my office. Darkness seemed to run off the rest of its body in an endless tide as it stared at me. I could feel goosebumps rising on my skin as I stared at its monstrous form. I knew it wouldn't hurt me, but I didn't make this any less scary. Kneel. I issued my order as I stared at it from behind my desk. Without putting any of my will into it, the creature took a rough semblance of a knee. Seeing it kneel before I did wonders for how I felt. Overall, though, I was happy with it. Now, all that I needed to do was see how capable it was. Perhaps I could pit it against a few zombies, or the Praetorians at least. After all, there is no better way to see how good they are than to place them against the best. I gestured for it to stand to the side with my choice made. Now it was time for me to check out the others and see what they looked like. I selected Poltergeist and spent a staggering 370 essence, and the familiar rune appeared once more. This time, though, instead of the baleful red hue that saturated my office, in its place was a soft gray light that filled every nook and cranny. Then, just as quick as it appeared, it vanished. I looked around the room and didn't really see anything, which made my hair stand on end. I could feel a set of eyes staring at me, but it originated from the ceiling. Show yourself. The faint outline of a childlike shape appeared hanging from the ceiling, followed by a quiet giggle of a little boy. I shivered slightly as I realized just how creepy this was going to be. Show me what you can do. The little boy vanished from the ceiling, a few of the chairs shook, and some blades I had sitting in the office rose from their racks. The sheaths were violently torn away, and the blades flew as if they were caught in a tornado. Ah yes, this reminded me of a few horror films that I watched growing up. It's funny that you never really give much thought to that stuff growing up. But then, when it's staring you in the face, it makes you question everything. Regardless, I'm just happy that I'm not on the receiving end of it. Though I felt terrible for whatever poor people had to deal with this. I motioned for the poltergeist to join the dark wraith, and I looked at my next option. Skeletal abominations, huh? Let's see what this bad boy is. I selected it, and dozens of minor runes appeared in my office, and bones of all sorts formed from the air. But as the runes vanished, the bones all quivered and shook before they were drawn to a single skull that sat just across from my desk. They all clattered as they scraped against my floor. The bones quickly flooded over one another. They clicked and clacked as they slammed into place. But the result was something that I wasn't ready for. Dozens of extended hands reached out and groped the ground. Femurs formed the various spider-like legs, and a single skull sat on top of the pile of mismatched bones. Dozens of fingers clacked into the ground as the monster crawled across the floor like some sort of insect. It took everything I had to repress the desire to vomit at the sight of the monster. Truly, this thing was an abomination, especially at the cost of 375 essence points. I quickly gestured for the skeleton to get out of my sight as I tried to process what it was I just saw. I tried my best to suppress the sight as I summoned the last undead I unlocked. A single rune appeared on the ground. This time, it was the color of ice and radiated a chilling air that seemed to permeate every fiber of my being. The air chilled even more as a head filled with white hair rose from the ground. A set of blue eyes that followed next seemed to be filled with predatory intelligence. Its flesh was a far cry from the decaying zombies. Instead, it was gray and pulled taut, revealing a wiry frame of muscle. Its long, talon-like fingers twitched as it breathed heavily, and it looked around the room. It took a deep breath and broke into a feral grin, revealing a set of long blood-stained canines. This being was monstrous, far more so than even the others that I had spawned in. The way it carried itself was with pure and unabated confidence, and yet, I knew the white was quickly the most powerful thing in the room. I glanced at its total essence cost and saw that it cost almost 500. Spawning these 4 cost me so much essence. Unless I'm creative about it, trying to populate the second zone with these mobs will be painful. I glanced over my menus and saw that I now had access to 3 more boss slots, so I would have to think hard and long about what I wanted to do when it came to them. I sat back and looked at my map to see if Ricard had finished what I asked him to do. It took me a bit to find them, but I saw they were in the expansion I started when I did. A dozen of them were standing in a square formation, with their weapons at parade rest. Something that I for sure didn't teach them. I glanced at the clock and then at the time I sent the message, and I immediately felt terrible. There was no telling how long they had been sitting there waiting for me to arrive. I quickly stood up, grabbed one of my swords, strapped it to my back, and made sure that my cloak was cleaned and my mask was on. Once I was satisfied, I checked over my essence points and made sure that I filled the domain with troops and I didn't have to refill anything. Once I was happy with it, I did the math for how much more I could expand the domain and still have enough left over to pull out resources from storage. At most, I would expand the domain by 4 kilometers and bring out all the stones that I was sitting on, along with metal and wood. But as I was finishing up, I realized that I still had those 4 mobs I spawned behind me. I'll take them along with me, I suppose, and get them acquainted with the next zone. I grabbed my bag and notebooks and did a massive teleport, eager to start expanding. This time, I will do it by myself. Error, the poltergeist failed to teleport. As I read, I groaned. No, this can't be happening. I refuse to have another child hanging around me. Nyx was a handful as it was. Once I finish, I will figure out how to get the poltergeist out. With a wave of my hand, I told the 4 mobs that they had to stay there and quickly apologized to the leader of the veterans for taking so long. I brought up my menus, selected the expansion option, and chose the 4-kilometer option. However, I only got hit with 3,800 essence instead of the 4,000 essence tag. It wasn't much in the way of savings, but at this point, I'll take anything I could get. I confirmed my choice and dismissed the screen. The ground trembled violently as the edge of the domain shifted and stretched back. Motes of earth-brown light fell from the sky in a torrential downpour, drowning out the violet light that radiated from the barrier. I caught my footing as I stepped to the side and quickly shifted through my menus. Now, all I had to do was spawn in all the materials that I needed. which sadly meant emptying my total stone reserve and a lot of the wood as well. I found a suitable spot far away from everyone and organized the pile of stone into something that could be accessed easily. Though that was pretty difficult, based on the amount of stone I had at my disposal. Maybe I won't dump it all at once. Instead, I dropped a quarter of it down and organized it in small stacks that should be easy to move around. As for the wood, it was placed much like firewood. As I waited for that stuff to be created, I made a large table so I could place down my backpack, along with the design plan. Granted, 4 kilometers wasn't massive in the grand scale of things. I still wanted to be prepared. Mostly since I decided that instead of just letting them slave away at this, I would be out here helping them. Though I will say, since becoming a level 2 domain, things seem to be created much faster than they have been before. The large planning table was ready in moments, and I threw my bag across its surface and quickly brought out all the paperwork. "Warrant officer!" I called out behind me while I opened up the large, folded map that held the contents of the next zone. The zombie shuffled in behind me and gave me a rough semblance of a bow. I nodded at him and pointed to where we were standing. "So, from now on, you are in charge of everyone here. Every order that you issue will be as if it came from me. With that being said, we will be working on the outskirts of the town." I pointed toward the part of the map that we were standing on. "So, from here, to here." I pointed to a spot that was mapped out to be 4 kilometers away. "We will make a road. So, we need to level the pathway here and lay out the stone. I will stay behind and tamper with our supply so it can be used." While I didn't know how to make concrete, I still had a few ideas to test out to see if I could turn the stone into something I would find on Earth. Maybe stretch the rock out, see if I can harden it a bit, and then use my settings to see if I could keep the ground locked in a state where it wouldn't erode or break. I reached out to my notebook and grabbed another sheet of paper with a 4-lane road drawn on it. This will be the road. It will branch off in the spots, which will lead to various points, like houses, stores, and farms. I pointed at all the intersections as I spoke, trying not to overwhelm the poor zombie. The warrant officer quickly bobbed his head in agreement, and I stepped away from the table. "Good, good. Let me spawn in the carts and tools we will need, and let's get to work. Ms. Alessia, what is Mother doing?" I glanced down towards the child before looking back at the Empress. It's scary how much they look alike, though I don't think she has noticed yet. She is leading a construction project to expand the domain. I rested my beloved pole axe against my shoulder and crossed my arms as I stood under a tree. I was far enough away that I wouldn't be noticed by anyone, but close enough that I could get to my Empress in the blink of an eye. Nyx scrunched her face as she stared at her mother. I don't understand why she would do such menial labor when she has an army of servants at her beck and call. I shook my head, feeling a bit exasperated by her mindset. It's incredible how far away she was from her mother in that regard. That's how she has always been. She wouldn't ask of us something that she wouldn't be willing to do herself. The little girl shook her head slightly. "I don't understand." I reached out and patted Nyx's head, eliciting a purr from her. "One day, you will. Anyway, come along, let's go visit the rest of the domain." "Okay." She jumped up and tried to rush ahead of me. But I reached out and grabbed her arm, pulling her back. "No, stay next to me." She groaned and stamped her foot on the ground in response. "Why?" "I wish to run around and play. Because there are many dangers that exist out there, and if anything were to happen to you, your mother would have my head," I told her as I pulled her back into step beside me. Her gaze flickered from me back to the woods as she processed the words. "But I'm a dragon. I can protect myself. It doesn't matter. You know what the Empress said, don't you?" A sigh of defeat escaped from her lips. "Fine. I'll listen, but only if you hold my hand." As she spoke, she reached her little hand up. Such a needy child. I took her hand as we walked down one of the small paths that I made some neophytes make as we cut through the forest. Today's fog was thinner than it usually was and gave the forest a more etheric look as it clung to the trees. Chirps filled the air, along with the sound of various squirrels shuffling through the undergrowth. Nyx was apparently enjoying herself as she looked around. "Ms. Alessia, what is that?" she asked as she pointed towards a few of the rodents scampering around the ground. Their fur was torn, and blood was congealed around open bite marks. The animals, noticing us, scurried over. These little guys are called squirrels. They live in the forest and don't really interact with anyone. I told her as I placed my poleaxe against a tree and squatted down, petting one gently on its head. Nyx followed suit and reached out towards the closest of the rodents. The squirrel sniffed her hand before it stood on its hind legs, allowing her to pet it. A soft smile crossed her face, and I felt a strange feeling in my chest. The way she smiled reminded me much of how the Empress smiled, something she does less of lately, on top of wearing that mask now. Ms. Alessia, may I keep it? Nyx's voice tore me from my thoughts, and I looked down at the little girl. Her face was locked in a pout as she held the little squirrel up for me to see. No, sadly, your mother has far too many animals in the royal area as it is. Her face dropped a bit as she set the squirrel down, and it quickly scampered off with its family. Okay. There, don't be sad. There are plenty of pets in the royal area for you to play with. Your mother even has a pack of wolves. I told her as I rubbed my hand against her black hair. The little girl perked up almost instantly at my words and the attention that she was getting. Can we go visit them next? Not yet. I want to finish showing you around the domain. Then we can go back, and you can play with them. I stood up and grabbed my poleaxe, and glanced around the forest. So far, it was clear there were no signs of the invaders. Just a few of the dark wraiths and phantoms from Amari's assassin division lurking nearby. Though by judging how Nyx was acting, she hadn't noticed them yet, which was good. Without saying a single word, I met the gaze of one of the dark wraiths, who quickly nodded its head as it vanished back into the shadows. I will agree to those terms then, Ms. Alessia, she replied as she dusted off her skirt and reached her little hand up to me. I nodded as I took her hand and walked in the stronghold's direction. I might as well let her meet all who serve her mother. We broke through the final tree line. The outline of the stronghold was hardly visible through the thick layer of fog that choked out much of the light. A dozen of the Empire's soldiers stood near the entrance of the secret path, which I would generally forbid, but in the interest of the princess's safety, it was something I would tolerate. At the behest of the detachment stood a centurion, who wielded 2 swords. His sickly flesh was dark, and a small splattering of slime on his face caught what little light that the fog didn't consume. Alessia. Welcome. The centurion crossed his arm over his chest and struggled to finish the salute. Thank you, I replied as I strode out of the forest and quickly assessed our surroundings. My dark wraiths had spread out, creating a large perimeter around us, and the phantoms were close behind. The roads were empty, barring the troops as they were returning from patrols or leaving the stronghold. Ms. Alessia, who are they? Nyx's small voice tore my gaze away from the area. These are your mother's soldiers. They protect these lands. I told her as I patted her head. She pressed herself as close to me as she could. Her eyes were wide as she looked around at the various soldiers surrounding us. They are scary. For a moment, her usual attitude vanished and was replaced with that of a scared child. Worry, not little one. These soldiers will give their lives to protect you. Usually, I would have never brought her this far out, but many of the invaders were busy fighting over one of the checkpoints, so we had some time before they were roaming again. Besides, it's not like they had a chance against me. She remained quiet while she clung onto my pants leg as we made our way towards the stronghold. The soldiers surrounded us in a tight circle, shielding Nyx from view as we marched. I glanced through the throng of soldiers and took in the area until I noticed a small puff of a dark flame coming from one of the dark wraiths. I nodded my head as I placed my hand on Nyx's shoulder. Hey, if we hurry to the stronghold, I'll talk your mother into giving you some head pats later, I whispered quietly as I tried to coax the child into moving a little faster. That sounds wonderful. She perked up slightly, and she moved a little faster than before. The soldiers around me picked up the pace as I looked back at the dark wraith that sent the signal and gave it a single nod of my head. The wraith melted back into the shadows as I turned my head and glanced at the large doors that were coming into view. The 2 soldiers that stood at attention there quickly spun on their heels and pressed their hands into the large doors. As the doors swung open, the deep sound of metal scraping against itself filled the air, barely drowning out the shrill sound of an invader getting cut down. Unfortunately for me, the sound of the door opening didn't quite have the desired effect. Ms. Alessia, what was that? Just an animal, I told her as I patted her shoulder and pushed her further into the stronghold. As we walked in, the soldiers broke away and headed towards the central building. The training grounds were busy as a whole platoon was there training. The pyre grounds had a few soldiers there, building a new foundation as carts of the fallen were brought in. Handfuls of soldiers were out patrolling the walls while another platoon was near the breach of the wall, ready to strike. The princess's eyes were wide as she looked around, clearly amazed at what she was seeing. Wow, this place is wonderful. That it is, Nyx, that it is, I told her as I walked up the staircase and propped open the door for her. A few warrant officers were in the lobby, though doing what I wasn't sure. Sometimes the unawakened could be strange. They would stand around, lost in their memories. They would act out their last moments, other times, struggling to find a way out. However, those would receive the Empress's peace as they were quietly ushered back to rest. We walked past the 3 warrant officers in the lobby and descended further into the building. Initially, I was going to come by here to check on the captain and the lieutenant to see how well they were faring while dealing with the invaders. But my job still had to be done, even if I had to take the princess along while doing it. I stood behind the door that led to the Stronghold's war room. Nyx stood beside me, her little hand clasped firmly between mine. I wrapped my fingers across its surface quickly, and a deep voice answered a second later. Enter. I pushed the door open and stepped into the dimly lit room. Dim candles hung from rusted metal sconces attached to the various pillars that enshrined the war table. Tattered yellow paper lay strewn across the table, but a single large map dominated it but was barely illuminated by the faint yellow light that struggled to fill the room. Seated at the circular table was Ricard. His fingers crossed, and his milky white eyes faded as he stared off into the distance. Ah, Alessia, I didn't expect to see you so soon. It's a pleasure to see you once more. He turned his head up towards me as he dropped his hands. His voice was faint, and his words seemed to be distracted. It is my pleasure, Captain. I am here taking the princess on a tour of the domain. I told him as I stepped into the room and gestured Nyx forward. The captain straightened up as fast as he could. Princess? Forgive me, Alessia, I hadn't realized that she was paying a visit. His eyes were still clouded as he seemed to gaze beyond us. The poor man, he was still caught in whatever life he thought he lived, unable to see what was truly happening before him. All is well, Captain. How are things going on the war front? I asked as I crossed the small distance between us and the table. Nyx scampered behind me, though she was still pressed against my leg. Ms. Alessia, what is he saying? She asked as she looked up at me. He said he wasn't expecting to see you, I told her as I pressed my finger to my lips, hoping that she would get the message. Thankfully, it seemed to stick, and she pursed her lips and nodded her little head. The invaders haven't really struck at the stronghold. They have been prodding the stronghold and have even taken 2 of the outposts. Ricard replied as he leaned against the table and looked over the map. I fear they are preparing for a massive invasion. Ah, there it is. While Ricard can react to the invaders well, he just hasn't seemed to realize that the life he knew is gone. Worry not, Captain, if any large force were to invade, we would react appropriately. He paused for a second as he reached out a metal-clad hand and looked at the map. Of course. I will hold the fort if that day comes. It is as the Empress demands. His gaze seemed to stretch once more, and I knew I was losing him again. But that was all right, perhaps I should leave him be. But as I stepped back with Nyx, attempting to usher her away quietly, the sound of wings rapidly beating filled the air as one of the courier pigeons appeared from a hole in the ceiling. The tiny bird released what sounded like a hybrid between a squawk and a groan. Its beady white eyes greedily drank in what little of the light that managed to radiate through the room. It landed on the table, hopped over to me, and presented a small piece of paper that was rolled up tightly pressed against its back. Curious, I reached out and quickly undid the seal. To whom this may concern. The adventurer known as Redrick has returned. The Empress, however, has informed me she is busy with a project and has named me the Prime Minister in her absence. In an hour, we will meet at the stronghold and hold a small meeting with Redrick and his delegation. Alessia, please attend since you are the most directly tied to the Empress. Also, she has noted that while you protect her daughter, she wants her daughter to learn how to live in this domain. Her words were, keep her safe, and teach her what you can. She has also noted that she wishes to speak with you about a few topics once she is finished with what she is working on. Regards. Karen. My eyes quickly skimmed the page, and I felt a twinge of emotion in my chest. Redrick, the man that started all this and dared drag my lady into this mess. I clenched the paper and felt a fire billowed in my chest as the memories resurfaced of that day. It also mixed with all the emotions that I felt then. That man caused her pain, and I hated him. He nearly took her away from me. Alessia, you are frightening me. The child's voice cracked the veil of anger that had settled around me, and I quickly released it when I saw her staring up at me. Her brilliant emerald eyes had tiny beads of water that were quickly forming on the sides, which caused me to pause. No, I'm sorry. I just saw something I didn't like, was all. I squatted down and made eye contact with her. But your mother just told me she wants me to teach you to act like a princess. Really? she asked as she sniffled and wiped away the tears that were running down her face. The fear in her eyes was still prevalent, but she seemed to have a good reaction to that. Yes, really. Some people are coming to visit, and your mother wants me to teach you how to interact with them. With that being said, you will also get to meet one of your mother's closest confidants. I told her as I reached out and gave her head another pat. I'm also sorry for scaring you, I didn't mean to. It's okay, Ms. Alessia. I know you didn't mean it. She told me as she reached forward and threw her arms around me. I stood there, shocked at the display. Before I tentatively reached out and returned her hug in kind. So you are going to teach me how to be a princess? She asked as she pulled away from me. Yes. However, this time, I need you to be quiet and watch how Karen and I talk to the envoys. Then one day, as you get better, then you can do it too. I told her as I stood up. I understand, Ms. Alessia, I will do my best. The little girl looked as if she were about to explode from the happiness that seemed to be flooding every inch of her veins. Good girl, I told her as I gave her head a pat and stood up to face the captain once more. Captain Ricard. I apologize for bothering you once more. The captain shifted his gaze from the map and towards me. Oh, Alessia, I didn't expect to see you so soon. He told me as he stood up from his chair, his body struggling to salute me. I've come here to inform you that a few envoys will arrive soon, headed by Lord Karen. We wish to use your office for a short time while we finish negotiations. Of course, as the Empress demands. His eyes seemed to clear up slightly, and his words became more focused as he shambled over. But, who is the young lady that stands next to you? As the captain approached us, Nyx quickly darted behind my leg. This is the Princess of Asteria. The princess? His words trailed off once more as his eyes glazed over. He stood there, as still as a statue, until he moved once more. Oh, the princess. Welcome to my stronghold. He told her as he tried to bow his body. His armor creaked, and the sound of various bones popping filled the air. You are as beautiful as your mother. Nyx shifted her glance from the captain to me. What did he say? He welcomes you here and says that you are as beautiful as your mother. Her skin flushed slightly, and she shook her head. No, mother is the most beautiful woman I couldn't hope to compare. Ricard straightened himself out as Nyx's words seemingly fell on deaf ears. His eyes still seemed to be slightly glazed over, but he seemed more lucid than he did a few short minutes ago. I will dispatch a platoon to Lord Karen and escort them here. The roads as of late have been filled with bandits, and there have been sightings of foreign troops. Do what you can, Ricard. If you need my support, please let me know. I could never ask the right hand of the Empress for anything. I will make do with what I have. Ricard told me as he limped over to the table and sat back down. As soon as Lieutenant Flint returns, I will send a detachment out. I stiffened at that and glanced at Nyx. I didn't want her to be around someone like Flint. Thank you, Ricard, if you need anything else, I will be in your office. Thank you for your help. I told him as I gave him the customary bow. Of course, Alessia. It is as the Empress demands. He replied as his eyes slowly glazed over once more. I rested my hand on Nyx's shoulder as this time, I was in a bit of a rush to get her away from here. But sadly, as I reached out to open the door, it swung on its own, revealing the large skeletal form of the lieutenant. Alessia. The skeleton nodded his head towards me. I narrowed my eyes at him and pushed Nyx through the door. Flint, I replied as I kept walking, not wanting to get drawn into a conversation with him. Especially not with her nearby. He was far too reckless and bloodthirsty, and he would prove to be a bad influence on her. Even if the Empress trained with him from time to time, I refused to allow such a vile being to influence Nyx. Okay, Nyx, I need you to sit here and not say anything. Just watch, okay? I told her as I pulled one chair towards the desk to stand behind her. The little girl nodded her little head. I understand, Ms. Alessia. I want to be the best princess I can be. The little girl nodded her head as she sat down, adjusted her skirt, and turned her nose upwards. If you want to be the best princess, then do as your mother does. I reached out and adjusted her bow, and gave her another soft pat on her head. She hummed thoughtfully and scrunched her face up. I see. Mother is an empress, after all. I thank you for your help. She dropped her head and affixed me with her emerald eyes that seemed to glitter like a pair of vibrant jewels. She looked like her mother. Though there were a few differences, like her face was a little rounder, and her hair was as dark as night. Even the scales that had once adorned her flesh seemed to be slowly fading away with the passage of time. I nodded and walked over to the wall, leaning against it. My poleaxe was well within my hand's reach. Do you like the domain so far? She bobbed her head quickly and kicked her feet. I do. It's all rather quaint. Everyone seems pleasant enough. At least the ones that I can understand. Don't feel bad. Your mother doesn't understand most of them either. She doesn't? Nyx's eyes went wide, and she looked as if her world had just come crashing down around her. Not at all. She only really talks to myself or Karen when he is around. I shrugged. I didn't feel much on the matter. While she may be oblivious at times, she still treats us well. Though it wasn't like anyone in the domain would rebel against her. Can you teach me how to talk to everyone? She pouted her lips and kicked her feet a little quicker as she leaned forward. I wish I could, but how we speak to each other isn't something that can really be taught. Though in time, you may pick up on a few things here and there. I crossed my arms and glanced around the room once more, making sure that all of my dark wraiths and phantoms were in position, especially in the shadows of the chairs that were positioned in front of the desk. If anyone had any funny ideas, they would get eviscerated on the spot, or they would buy me enough time to get Nyx to safety. But I hope it won't come to that. That's not fair. She huffed at me and crossed her arms. However, as soon as I went to retort, I heard a rap on the door. I grabbed my poleaxe and walked over to Nyx. Enter. The door swung open, quietly groaning on its hinges. The influx of air into the room caused the dying candles that lined the room to flicker. Gazing at us from the darkness was the familiar set of crimson-red eyes. To my side, I could hear Nyx gasp, and then a tiny hand graze against my own. I took her hand as Karen strode into the room. His hood was up, and his face was shrouded in abyssal darkness that only seemed to grow darker each time I saw him. Lady Alessia, greetings. He gave me a slight bow and then glanced over to my left. Ah, Princess, it is good to see you. He gave her an even bigger bow. Yet I could feel the start of a mental message as it prodded my head. What did Calixa do this time? I haven't the slightest idea. I'm just as surprised as you are. My eyes instinctively went behind Karen as I glanced at the forms behind him. The first that I noticed was Redrick. The blasted man who dragged my empress into this mess. Rage built in my chest, but I held it back. Partially because I knew it was unbecoming of me. The rest was because I didn't want to see that look of disappointment in her eyes if I screwed this up. The mere thought alone filled me with an emotion I wasn't sure I had a name for. He wore a red tunic with golden lace down the seams, and his head of red hair ran wild around him. His trousers seemed to be made of unknown material that shimmered in the light. It was excessive and not likely to hold a weapon, though I wasn't all that concerned about it. I could easily crush him in a fight. As I was checking him out, trying to locate any spot where a weapon could be hidden, I felt another message form in my mind. The girl looks like a smaller version of her. Karen's mental voice tore my attention away from what I was doing. I sent him a mental nod in response. She very much did. Behind Redrick was the older gentleman I remember being named Gunther. I had no quarrels with the man. He seemed like he had a good head on his shoulders. The way he carried himself reminded me of the legionaries. He was confident and proud. Clearly, he was a soldier in his younger years, and that alone garnered my respect. There can be no better honor than to dedicate yourself to a cause greater than yourself. He was wearing the same armor that I first saw him in. The scratches that adorned the gray leather cuirass seemed to grow in number and looked to be like they were polished over. Perhaps mementos or battle honors. Some people have strange customs, but who was I to judge? I gave him a once-over, trying to see where any weapons could be stashed away, but as I was doing it, our eyes met, and he gave me a nod. It was slight and almost unperceivable even to me, but it was still there nonetheless. He was far too honorable for that, at least, that is what I could glimmer from his eyes. I returned the gesture to him and took stock of the last person who entered the room. He was an average-sized man, or what I would consider average, since he stood in between Gunther and Redrick in size. His hair was short, yet it was long enough for him to style it in a swept-back look. His eyes were blue, with tiny flakes of black, and he seemed to look over the room, glancing at all the corners and crevices. Overall, he seemed to be unremarkable, which put me on edge. It was a little too plain, especially with his clothes that stood in stark contrast to what Redrick was wearing. Lady Alessia, it is a pleasure to see you once more. Redrick's voice broke the silence, and my eyes shot back to him. Greetings, Redrick, I replied professionally and clenched my poleaxe all the tighter. His eyes fell on the child next to me. May I ask who this is? Clearly, the sight of Nyx surprised him. But I didn't blame him. When I first saw her, I was shocked as well. But now, the little one has grown on me. I glanced down at her from the corner of my eye and saw that she hardly moved. She was uncomfortable with the situation. I squeezed her hand under the table, and I could see some of the tension melt off of her body. This is Princess Nyx. She is here to watch the proceedings. Redrick closed his eyes and nodded his head once. A sight that I now understood to be an attempt at recollection. At least, that's what I would assume it to be. The Empress would do the same thing, especially when she was writing. I understand. It's a pleasure to meet you, Princess Nyx. His eyes darted towards me, ensuring I was happy with the title. I nodded my head, and he cleared his throat. Princess, you may call me Redrick. As for my companions, this is Gunther Aquilio. The man gestured towards Gunther, who gave the princess a nod. He didn't seem as resentful as he used to, though I assumed that was due in part to her primarily human-like appearance. And this is Cato Regulus. He will serve as an ambassador for Corinthia. I do hope we can build a strong future relationship, Cato spoke to us as he bowed. His words dripped with faux sweetness as he ended his bow with a flourish. It was excessive if you asked me, but I suppose that was the semantics of political discussion. It was something that I didn't quite enjoy and would much rather leave for Karen. Thank you for the introductions. I am Karen, the ferryman. But I am also the Prime Minister of Asteria. I will be your direct conduit to the Empress of these lands. The lady seated across from you all is the land's princess. Finally, the lady standing to her left is Alessia, the captain of the Empress's guard. Karen gestured as he spoke to the living beings across from us. The more he spoke, the more I realized that this wasn't for me. It all seemed so redundant and flowery. I much rather be out and about training and near my lady's side. But I will bear this burden for now. Redrick gestured for everyone to take a seat. Thank you for entertaining us today, Lord Karen. I come bearing news from the outside world, along with our return on the contract. For what felt like an eternity, there were pointless words spoken between Karen and Redrick, mostly revolving around what was going to be brought into the domain and how. I toned most of it out, at least until he presented a small bag that had glittering clear stones embedded into the khaki-colored leather. A small twine band was wrapped around a radiant blue gem that sat in the center of the triangular flap. This is a gift from me to the Empress. Contained within are a bottle of Severian red wine, a bundle of coins, and a few other things that I hope she will enjoy. Redrick sat forward, placed the bag onto the table, and slid it over to Karen. The skeleton reached out and took the bag, which quickly vanished into the recess of his black cloak. I will pass on the message to her. As for the next batch of goods, we will have that delivered to you within a few days. That sounds splendid. How about the housing provision that we discussed earlier? Redrick asked as he sat back and crossed his legs. We are currently working on that. The lady is currently working on clearing a path towards the next town over. Once it is finished, we will gift you a residency there. The skeleton sat forward and laced his gloved fingers together. Already, I was growing bored once more, and if I felt that, then there was no telling how the child must feel right now. I cast a quick glance down and saw that the little girl was trying to keep her eyes open. I guess all the new and exciting stuff must have worn her out. But at least she was trying to stay awake. Perhaps I should take her back so she can rest. Perfect. I think that covers all of us for now. The rest we can discuss once the next batch of goods has been finished. Now, I believe Cato wishes to speak to you. The redhead gestured toward the other man. His eyes flickered between myself and Nyx before they finally settled on Karen. Thank you, sir. Redrick. The man cleared his throat. I am here on behalf of King Aurelius to ascertain the domain's intentions and to see if I can broker a deal between us. However, I wasn't expecting to see such guile. Karen focused on Cato, his burning red eyes flicking as if the flames that gave them life were stirring into full blast as he regarded the man. Tell me, Cato, what is it that your king desires? As Karen's voice took a more magical undertone, Cato's eyes glazed softly. King Aurelius seeks to hold back Velcrest and to rout out the nobility that does not hold any sort of loyalty to our country. Everyday allegiances are changing, and new kingdoms are rising from the dust of the old. The times are changing, and we fear what is to come. Well, Lady Asteria has made it clear that she doesn't wish to be involved in anyone's affairs, for Asteria is her first priority. However, even though that may be the case, we may still enter certain pacts that may benefit us both, albeit indirectly. The skeleton's voice rolled through the air like a soft tide. The magical nature of his words was but a soft edge that seemed to grow duller with each passing second. We wish to make an exclusive weapons deal and a non-aggression pact. There are far too many hounds out for blood, and we especially wished to avoid a war with an undead faction. The glaze that had overtaken Cato's eyes faded as fast as the magic that filled the air. Worry not, Lady Asteria has no desire to wage war on the outside, so we will happily agree to a non-aggression pact. As for a weapons deal, publicly, it's an offer we will have to decline since it would put us on a specific side. However, privately, it's an offer that we will happily take as long as you deliver the raw materials for it. Each exchange will be made privately, in a secure location. Cato nodded his head as he sat forward in his chair. That would be wise, yes. Many nobles are clamoring for the removal of this domain, but just as many are curious. We've never met a domain before that so openly deals in negotiations. While my power comes directly from the king, I still have to tread a careful line, for now at least. Ah, worry not, Sir Cato. Any deal we make can be filed away on a private level, and will be honored. As Karen spoke, I felt something brush against my arm. I glanced down and saw that Nyx had lost her battle with sleep and had passed out. I let go of her hand, placed my hand on her head, and looked around. Cato was still stuck in a fierce deliberation with Karen as the negotiations went forward. However, Redrick smirked as he looked at me, no doubt amused by the fact that I seemed to have a caring side to me. Gunther seemed slightly amused at the fact that the princess had passed out during a meeting. But I didn't care, really. Out of everyone in this domain, she and her mother are the only ones who slept. Lord Karen, I will take my leave now. The princess has fallen asleep, so it's for the best that I get her home. I pushed my words through our mental link as I shifted my polearm and picked Nyx up. Forgive me, but I must take my leave now. Ah yes, it's easy to forget about living necessities. I will keep you up to date about what has transpired here. Cato glanced up towards me, his eyes locked onto Nyx, and his features softened slightly. I understand. Tell Empress Asteria that I send my regards and to thank her for sparing some time today. Of course, I replied as I positioned Nyx in a way that I could carry both her in one arm and my poleaxe in the other. Farewell, Alessia, Redrick spoke up, and I glanced at him. The disdain I felt for him boiled under the surface, but I held it back. It was the right thing to do. Farewell Redrick, Gunther. I gave them both a nod as I headed out of the office. Nyx mumbled something in her sleep as she adjusted herself and wrapped her arms around my neck. I'll leave a few dark wraiths for you, just in case something happens. I received a mental nod in return as I walked out of the office. All but 2 of the dark wraiths flooded out of the room, trailing behind us in the veil of darkness. The phantoms lurked a little further away, ever vigilant for anything that would be a threat to us. Perhaps I shouldn't have used the child as an excuse to get out of the meeting, but it was dreadfully dull. Diplomacy really isn't my thing, and I trust Karen enough to leave him independent. It took a few hours, but eventually, we made it back to the office. Most of the honor guards were in the training areas, with very few left in the main lobby. But the ones that guarded this place were amongst the best that I could offer. As I strode through the lobby, the honor guard dubbed as the Blade Masters noticed me and cracked off into a salute. I nodded at them as Nyx adjusted herself in my arms and mumbled something else quietly. The girl slept like a rock. I weaved my way through the labyrinth underground and came to the door of the Empress's office. Posted outside were 2 spirits who had been tutored by Amari and myself to create a unique type of Praetorian known as the Palatine Guard. At the moment, these were the only 2, but they were fearsome warriors. Meticulously trained in assassination and frontline combat, these 2 were the cream of the crop, and hopefully soon, I can organize an entire platoon, at least when I get the troops for it. The 2 nodded at me and opened up the door. As I walked through, I saw my lady sitting on a chair. The mask she wore obscured her face, but her eyes screamed exhaustion. Greetings, Empress. I bowed as well as I could, careful to not wake the child. She lazily glanced over at me. Oh, Alessia, hello. How was your trip? As she spoke, a yawn punctuated her words. As I went to reply, Nyx stirred and quickly jumped out of my arms. Mother! I've missed you so. She ran across the ground and threw herself into the Empress's arms. She stiffened slightly as her child wrapped her arms around her neck. Lady Asteria seemed a little uncomfortable at the sudden onslaught of affection. Eventually, she caved and returned the gesture. Hello there Nyx, how was your day? It was perfectly splendid. Ms. Alessia and I explored the area. She showed me these little creatures, called squirrels, that were this big. As Nyx spoke, she gestured wildly, and the Empress focused on her daughter. Nodding her head and listening to her speak. Now that I think about it, she doesn't ever talk about her parents. Whenever she does, it seems like sadness is the dominant emotion. There was still so much that I didn't know about her, and yet I found myself wanting to know more about her. Yet the idea scared me, as it filled me with emotion that I have long since forgotten. Why was I like this? Mother, does Mr. Karen scare you as well? Nyx's face hung low as she curled into my lap. I ran my fingers through her hair as I fought the swell of emotions that seemed to dominate my being. It was so strange to have someone treat me like this. I never once thought I would be a mother in all of my years, but here I was. There was so much that terrified me and a lot of things that haunted me since childhood. I was worried that I would turn out like my parents, which I refused to do. No. He is a very kind man. I told her as I patted her head before wrapping my arms around her. His eyes scared me. They raged like a fire, and he looked like a demon emerging from the darkness. I couldn't help but chuckle at the way she described him. Karen was much like a grandfather, more than anything else. Don't worry, Karen is one of the nicest people you will ever meet. In fact, he was the first person I met here, and he has helped me through a lot. Ms. Alessia said the same thing. But I am still unsure about him. She yawned as she nestled herself more into my lap. Mother, I'm tired. Poor thing. I cooed softly as I kept running my fingers through her soft, silk-like hair. Would you like to go to bed? MHM. She murmured softly as I glanced up at Alessia. Her arms were crossed, and she was leaning against the wall. She seemed like she was lost in her own thoughts, so for a time, I would leave her be. I wrapped my arms around Nyx, carried her over to my bed. The little girl giggled as I hefted her up into the air, and I felt a warmth that spread through my chest with each pulse. Was this how my mom felt when I was younger? The thought sent a cruel knife through my heart as I realized just how much I missed my parents. I wanted to make everything right and see them again. I pushed open the door to my bedroom and gently tickled Nyx, causing her to release a new batch of giggles as she struggled to get away. Mother, stop right this instant. She cackled like a madwoman as I brought her over to my bed and laid her down. She took a few heaving breaths as I tucked her in. Will you lay with me for a while? She gazed up at me, her eyes wide and her lips stuck in a pout. Of course. To be honest, I really didn't because I had things I needed to do, but I also needed to make sure that she stayed happy. I refused to put her through what I went through. She scooted over for me, and I slid under the blanket. Nyx quickly threw her arms around me as I tried to position the blanket over us. Once we were both comfortable, she tugged on my arm and laid her head on it, and stared up at me. Mother, why do you wear that mask? I reached up and ran my fingers across the smooth metallic surface. There is no real reason right now. I have it, so the people outside of Asteria don't see my face. Other than that, I just forget that it's on most days. I reached my hand up and quickly pulled it off. Nyx stared up at me for a short time, her eyes drinking in my features with greed. Mother, you are beautiful. I chuckled quietly, unsure of how to handle the compliment. It's not very often that I get called that. Thank you, Nyx. I'm glad you think so. She nodded her head, and she closed her eyes, and we both fell into silence. The warmth of her body radiated from her in waves, washing over me. It wasn't unpleasant, but it was something that I wasn't used to. I laid there for a while, and stared up at my ceiling, trying to figure out what my life was coming to. Here I was, lying in bed with my familiar, who was acting more like a daughter than anything else. Not too long ago, I talked to a god, and I have an army at my beck and call. Not to mention I was an empress, at least by my design. If I was anyone else, I feel like this would be my peak, but I wasn't satisfied yet. I wanted more. No, I needed more. I would claw my way to the heavens to get what I wanted. I will keep expanding Asteria. My armies will grow, and I will erect beautiful cities. One day, the entire world will know my name. But those thoughts seemed alien to me. I recognized the mental voice as my own, but it felt like there was something more there. Something that sat in the back of my mind, pushing me forward. It whispered to me, telling me that there was more power for me to take as my own. All I had to do was tame it, break it, and form it to my will. The more I pondered on the thought, the more I wanted to do it. This was my land and my people, and I will do everything I can for them. My eyes grew heavy as the rhythmic breaths of my daughter lured me into sleep. I yawned and rolled over and wrapped my arms around her. Perhaps this wasn't so bad at all. It would take some getting used to. When I woke up, I forced myself to sit up straight. My body felt beyond well rested, and the exhaustion that had plagued me throughout the day yesterday had long since vanished. This was the best that I have slept in quite a long time. I glanced around the room and saw that Nyx had vanished, but the sounds of childish giggling from my office told me that she was still close by. I rubbed away the remnants of exhaustion that hung around my eyes and stood up. I stretched for a bit, cracking a few of my joints and causing a gentle burn to envelop my body. Once I was finished, I went to see what Nix was up to. When I walked into my office, I saw that Nix was playing the wolves who had returned. Grim had a small scar that crossed his face, just under his eye that trailed to his muzzle. One looked fresh, and it seemed like he was missing two of his pack mates. Poor guy. Nix, however, didn't seem to notice and was busy rolling around with one of the smaller ones. While the wolf seemed to have a solid 50 kilograms on her, she seemed to hold her own. I rested against the wall and watched her for a bit, letting her have her fun. After a little while, she finally noticed me and shot up like a bullet. "Mother!" she screamed as she rushed over to me and threw her arms around my legs. Once again, I was surprised by her sudden onslaught of affection, but I quickly recovered and rubbed her head. "Hello, Nix, did you sleep well?" I asked as I decoupled from her. "Yes, Mother, I did," she told me as she scampered around the room and towards a chair. I followed suit, went to my desk, pulled out a piece of paper, and looked at the message that Karen had sent me while I was passed out. "Mistress, Redrick had stopped by and brought a gift for you, as well as payment. I told him that the next shipment would be ready in a few days for him to take back. There was also an ambassador for a kingdom known as Corinthia. We have brokered a trade deal between us and the kingdom, though it's a bit more secretive. The only stuff that we need to do for them is to create weapons and ship them off. We will receive raw materials in return, and I even secured a few books you may find interesting and useful. I will be by later to drop off his gift and further discuss the negotiations." Karen. I read the paper and nodded my head. Good, I can double the output of resources with that trade deal. Perhaps I could build mines and then use it as leverage for later, on top of bringing in my own resources. Though I would have to figure out if it would cost less essence just to convert it or go through the manual smelting process. If that was the case, I would have to find someone familiar with the process cause I had no idea what to do. As for books, those would come in handy. I could actually field a mage corp, which would benefit and help expand my army a bit. Not to mention I could start getting Nix trained to protect herself. Hell, if even one of those books contained information on how to smelt or item creation by hand, I would be in a good spot. "Mother, what are you thinking about?" Nix's voice chased away my train of thought, and I looked over at her. "Just trying to figure out how to tackle the day, there's a lot I have to do and balance," I replied as I planned out the next portion of the resources to trade. I recently created a new concrete mixture, which required a bunch of trial and error. At first, I had no idea what I needed to do to make something like that. I knew for sure that I needed gravel, sand, water, but I knew I didn't have limestone or anything like that after that. But what I had on hand was a bunch of bone powder, which I assumed was close enough to what I needed. Though I tried to ignore where the powder came from. "So you have to work today?" Nix asked as she kicked her feet and pouted once more. "Sadly, yes. I need to keep working if I want this domain to stay together. Besides, I have to start training once more, and I want you to join me." Nix's eyes went wide at the mention of training, and a feral glint appeared. "Fighting?" she asked as she leaned forward, and the tips of her canine-like teeth appeared. Her tongue reached out and slithered across the tips. "Oh no, don't tell me she's a battle junkie." "At first, no, I want to make sure you are trained, just in case something happens and you need to protect yourself." I crossed my arms and sat back in my chair, dismissing my screen. "Fighting is fun." Her cute face seemed to melt away, revealing the apex predator that lurked just beneath the facade. In a way, it was scary to behold. I had almost forgotten that she was a dragon polymorphed into human form. I cleared my throat as I shoved away from the shock. "Well, I'll have Alessia train you for a time until we figure out what you like." I hoped that some of the stuff that was brought to me would come in handy for training in the future, especially for her. If I could play to her strengths, I would have another powerful asset to wield. Though I probably wouldn't let her be on her own for quite a while. In fact, the mere thought of someone laying a hand on sent a shot of fiery white rage through my veins. "I do like Ms. Alessia." Nix mused quietly to herself while kicking her feet. "Good, I'm glad to hear that." I quickly dampened the rage, trying to lash out since there was no real reason for it to be there. I mean, it was just a thought after all. "Speaking of Alessia, have you seen her?" Nix hummed softly to herself as she scrunched up her small face. "I can't say that I have recently. She was here just before you woke up." I quickly opened up my screen, brought up Alessia's name, and wrote her a small message, telling her to come to see me and bring along that gift that Karen had, if it was on the way, of course. I dismissed the screen and sat back in the chair. So, how did you like the negotiations? Ugh, Mother, they were so boring. Just mindless chattering. She rolled her eyes and crossed her arms. Tell me about it. I really hated dealing with negotiations. It was such a delicate dance that it was hard for me to keep up at times. While I could do it, I much rather leave it to the people who knew what they were doing, which in this case, it was Karen. I swear, without him, I would be so lost. Can we play later, Mother? I glanced down towards Nyx and saw her giving me a set of the biggest puppy eyes I could imagine. Damn child and her manipulations. Later. I have to do a few things, and then we can play. I quickly formed a list in my mind about what I had to do today. The first thing is, I really needed to make a new batch of materials to ship out. I may include some concrete, and a few other things, just for variety. Right after, I needed to see what weapons had to be made for Karen, and then I suppose I could play with Nyx. Though I had a feeling, her version of playing was like fighting. Do you promise? I do. Let me just get all of this stuff done, then we can play. Nyx flashed me a brilliant smile and hopped out of her chair. Thank you, Mother. I'm going to go play with the wolves then for now. She jumped off her chair and scampered off towards the canines without giving me a chance to respond. At least she wasn't being obnoxious anymore. I felt a smile cross my face as I watched her run off, and a warmth spread through my chest. I think I'm finally finding some happiness. The sole thing I've been searching for, and it's within my grasp. I pulled my eyes away from her and glanced back at my menus. Now I just needed to knock out today's to-do list. Let's see, what did I want to give Redrick? I glanced through my templates and spawned in a bunch more pens, and then to match it, I spawned in a few of the plastic bits filled with ink, just so people could refill the pens. I wasn't sure what kind of operation Redrick was running, but I know how many business owners were, so I might as well try to help the people out the best that I could. For the next portion, I would sell the concrete to him, but I think that would be something I would need to do last since this stuff will get heavy fast. Perhaps I should check with him first and then go from there. I looked through my templates once more, trying to decide on what I wanted to give away. Maybe I could do some chef knives. But, I would make something else because the template I have was my own, and I would be damned if someone used the same knife. I wanted to feel special, damn it. I took a copy of the template, altered the length, and made the blade a bit thicker and with more of a curve so they could rock the blade. Once I was happy, I changed the color of the handle tar black and made it look a bit more polished for appearance's sake. Once I was happy, I created a batch of 50 and another crate to store them all. I suppose I could create a sheath, but that would bite into resources I didn't have at the moment, so for now, I'll let that be Redrick's problem. I dismissed my screen and worked on something else while waiting for the stuff to finish spawning. But what did I want to do? I thought it over for a moment and glanced down at my metallic hand. It's been a while since I've last done this, and I really have given little thought to it all. I know I should since it's vital, but I've been so busy with everything lately. I clenched my fist and pushed my soul from my medium. However, I went with a simple blade instead of the dragon claws I had. My mastery over it has grown since the last time I've tried, but it was still difficult to form my soul into the shape that I wanted. I pushed harder and stretched the shape out a bit more. I pushed against the force that desperately fought against me. The familiar white energy slowly flowed across my fingertips and coalesced into the shape of a dagger. But this wasn't it. I wanted more. I pushed with everything I had, and I could feel the sweat run down my face as my soul flowed outwards as my blade took its shape. The blade grew outwards and enveloped my entire hand. Energy coalesced around the blade and rushed inwards, pushing it further up. Until, at last, it finally stopped expanding. The blade was rigid and came to a tapered point near the top, much like a Tonto blade. The light around my new blade seemed to flicker and swirl as small twinges of violet light seemed to course through the sword. I tried to wiggle my fingers but found that they were constricted. So this blade was directly attached to my hand. While my finger movement was restricted, I still had complete control of my wrist, which was good. Congratulations! You have unlocked the Soul Blade template. The words flowed across my screen, and I nodded my head. Good, good. I had 2 weapon templates to call on now. My dragon claws and my sword, but I was torn between the 2 of them. I called upon my dragon claws and watched my sword shatter as if it were glass. The hundreds of pieces rearranged themselves quickly as the outline took shape, and in the blink of an eye, my claws were visible. The scales scintillated in the light, as white and violet bled into another. They seemed to have shrunk since the last time I saw them. Well, the claws seemed as long as ever, but overall the template fit my hand better. It was almost like wearing a glove that perfectly fit. I waved my hand around and enjoyed how the air seemed to scream as the tips of nails cut through it with ease. They made me feel powerful, but I know I wasn't that great with them yet. Perhaps these would be better than the blade. It evoked more emotion from me than the sword did, but I would test them both out to see which I liked the most. "Empress, you called?" Alessia's voice tore me from my thoughts, and I looked up at her and dismissed my blades. "Ah, hello." "Yes, I did." I glanced up at her and saw the familiar pair of burning red eyes. "Oh, Karen, how are you?" I asked as I cleared my throat and straightened up a bit. "Mistress." He replied with a soft bow. His black cloak was darker than ever and seemed to devour all the surrounding light with glee. "It's been a while, take a seat." I gestured towards the seat in front of me. As I looked at him, I realized that I'd been neglecting him for a while. In fact, I can't remember the last time that I had an actual conversation with him. They both sat down, and a second later, I heard the sound of feet running towards me. "Ms. Alessia," Nyx's voice called out as she rushed across the room. Her little face was alight with happiness. "Hello there, Nyx." Alessia's face was as impassive as ever, though I could see a bit of happiness in her eyes. I was glad those two got along. As she rushed over, she paused as she gazed at Karen's form. Her face went wide in fear, and she stopped in her tracks. I gazed at her and chuckled as I realized she was terrified of him. I didn't see why, though. He was like a loving grandfather. She scampered over to me and hid behind my chair. The tips of her fingers pressed gently against my back. Karen clacked his teeth together in a facsimile of a laugh as he regarded my daughter. "Hello once more, Nyx." He gave her a slight bow before he sat down. I felt her fingers clench behind me, and I had to suppress another giggle that threatened to escape from my lips. I wonder why the poor girl was so terrified of him outside of what she told me earlier. But I wouldn't push her on it. Not yet, anyway. "I didn't expect to see you today, Karen. What brings you by?" I sat forward in my chair and interlaced my fingers. "I come by, bearing a gift from Redrick." He reached into the cavernous maw of his robe and pulled out a small satchel-looking bag with a single turquoise stone in the center with a string that held it close. All along the seams were a bunch of gems, though I wasn't sure what they could be. Possibly diamonds, or crystals, maybe. Regardless, it was something that I wouldn't mind wearing around. "Oh, I like it." I reached out and took the bag, shocked at how light it felt. It was almost on par with my sports bag. He said there was some wine, coins, and a few other things that you may like in there. When I heard wine, I perked up and instantly undid the string. Back on Earth, I was a bit of a drinker. Nothing extraordinary, but I was a line cook. How else was I supposed to wind down after a long day? Honestly, though, I much rather it is wine than anything else. I'd rather not toe the fine line that is alcoholism. I pulled the flap back, glanced in the bag, and saw that only darkness sat within. Now, if this was anything like my sports bag, all I had to do was just reach my hand in and feel around for a second. With the eagerness of a child in a candy store, I reached in and tentatively felt around. First, my hands brushed against a book. Damn, not what I wanted first, but this would do for now. I pulled it out and laid it on the desk. The front had dozens of strange magical rune-like shapes inscribed into the surface, painted in a myriad of reds, blues, and greens that fulgurated in the lighting in my office. While I couldn't understand what the runes meant, I was still drawn to them, as if some part of me knew what they were. I reached out and traced my fingers across the shapes that seemed to twirl across the cover. Each second I spent following the runes with my eyes, the more patterns that I seemed to find. At first, they seemed to be shaped like a star, but then the colors and lines would meld together, into the shape of a snowflake. Before that, two shattered into dozens of smaller geometric shapes that my mind had no name for. "Karen, what is this book?" I asked as I slid it away and tried to fight the desire to grab the book once more. It took a lot of mental strength to break the trance that had come over me, but I yearned for more once I did. It seems to be a book on various forms of magic. The cover has some form of illusion magic, though it was nothing that could harm you. The skeleton reached across the table and swiped the book. His crimson eyes flashed as he stared at the cover. "Oh yes, it's just an illusion charm to make the book a little more appealing." I felt a twinge of heat rise to my cheeks as I cleared myself through. How embarrassing. "Do you think you can use that book then?" A part of me died at the thought of parting with it, but let's be honest. It's not like I had a use for it, other than for it to sit around looking pretty. I did lack the use of magic, after all. Potentially yes. I can try to teach some others how to use magic with it. Maybe even advance my class with it. He shifted the book to the side and peeked around its corner. Go for it. Just make sure that you teach Nyx how to use magic. I waved my hand and buried my disappointment. It was just so pretty to look at, and I didn't want to risk consuming it. Not at least until I was sure that I could get all the knowledge within. Wait. Mother. Nyx shot from around my chair and glared at me. Her dress seemed to billow in the air from the sheer speed she moved in that moment. I raised my eyebrow at her as I sat back in my chair. The panic in her eyes was prevalent as her lips were locked into a pout. Don't make me do that. I implore you. Nyx, you are going to have to. This is a dangerous place, and I need to make sure that you know how to defend yourself. I stared right back at her, meeting her gaze, trying to read it and understand her a little better. I know she was scared, but he wasn't going to hurt her. But I'm a dragon. I can take care of myself. The fear in her eyes vanished, and she crossed her arms and huffed at me, and turned her head away. Don't you want to be stronger? I sighed as I sat back in my chair. She is such a hard-headed child, but there are ways to get to her. At those words, she turned her head back towards me just a little, and cocked one of her eyebrows upwards. Stronger? I bit the inside of my lip as I fought the smile that wanted to cross my face. There we go. Yes. Learning magic from Karen will help you become an even stronger dragon. She carefully looked at me as if she was scrutinizing me for any sense of me lying to her before she looked at Karen. Fine then. I will begrudgingly accept your offer. Karen met my gaze and gave me a strange look. I could only shrug. She was a handful, that's for sure. Good. I want you to become the strongest dragon that you can be. I layered a bit of sweetness to my words, trying to bolster her ego just a little bit. After all, how else was I going to point her in the right direction without directly forcing her? A snicker left her lips as she put her hands on her hips and jutted her face upwards proudly. Of course, I will be. I could only roll my eyes at her, definitely a handful. I hope she doesn't get worse as she gets older. I sat back up and reached out towards the bag as Nyx rushed from her spot and towards Alessia, throwing herself onto her lap. Now let's see what other goodies are here for me to take. I rummaged through the space once more, and a felt cloth brushed against my fingers. Curious, I grabbed it and felt the heavy weight of coins. Damn, I knew Karen said there were some in there, but it didn't help dampen the disappointment that I felt. I know I shouldn't be greedy, but a girl can dream after all. I placed them on the table, quickly undid the tiny string that closed the bag, and dumped out all the coins. The first that I saw was a bundle of the copper ones, which I already had a bunch of. There were a few silver coins, but I didn't expect to see 2 golden coins. The edges were chiseled and had small markings that were all intertwined. On the front of the coin was a laurel wreath, clad in 3 leaves, that rested on top of a sword. That must be the country of origin's banner or something of the sort. Regardless, the coin had little in the way of shock value, other than the fact that it looked like freshly polished gold. I wonder what the exchange rate for this coin was on the outside. Perhaps I should do a little digging and see for myself. Skillfully I stacked the coins by material, slid them over, and reached back into the bag, eager to find out what else lay within. Next was the wine that Karen was talking about. The bottle itself looked much like how I'd expect a wine bottle to look. The label was paper and looked to be written by a very skilled hand. I nodded as I read over the label and saw that it was made in the year 1232. I didn't know what year it was for them now, so there was no telling how valuable it was. But it didn't matter. It was mine now. I gave the bottle a quick swirl and saw that it was thick and viscous and looked as if they filled it to the brim with fresh blood. I set it down and fought the urge to pop the cork and down the bottle. The mere thought of letting my child down seemed to haunt me in more ways than one. Why did I have to be responsible? Without a second thought on the matter, I shoved my hand into the bag to see what else was in there and came across a few more books. Ah, this was good, very good. I quickly pulled them out and set them down on the table before giving the bag one last look over to make sure that there was nothing else that I was missing in there. I set the bag down next to the desk and glanced everything over. I now owned another book on magical theory, which I would read and then give to Karen. While I had no use for a book that detailed the use of magic, I was still curious about its theory. Perhaps I could do something with it in the domain once I figure it out. As for the rest, it was a collection of histories and folklore, which I was thankful for. Perhaps now I wouldn't be as in the dark as I have been. I ran my fingers across the cover of the books, thinking about what I now had at my disposal. In a way, it was like my ticket out of here, without having to leave the safety of my domain. I was still super tempted to venture out and explore the rest of the world, but right now, it was just infeasible for me. Mistress, we have a few things to discuss regarding the domain. Karen's words broke through my thoughts like a sledgehammer and dragged me back to reality. What's up? I asked as I pushed the books to the side and turned my attention to him. My eyes drifted to the side and saw that Nyx was curled up on Alessia's lap and was out cold. With how your domain is set up and considering that the domain is in its second expansion phase, you may find it difficult to administer everything yourself. His words, though monotonous, carried a sense of urgency. It made sense. It was already a lot of work making sure that everything was in order, not to mention that I constantly needed to micromanage a few things to ensure they were done. I couldn't even imagine how things would be once this domain grew even more extensive. What do you suggest I do then? Perhaps increase the government capacity to some extent. So far, it's just you and I. His teeth clacked together, sending a loud crack that echoed through the room. I bobbed my head and thought about it. It would remove a lot of the stress off of me and would allow me to function a bit more autonomously than I usually do. I could now focus my efforts more on specific areas than focusing on general areas. I bit my lip and tried to sift through some of my ideas. How about a council then, or a cabinet? He ground his teeth together as his eyes fluctuated. That would be for the best. What do you have in mind? As my mind quickly threw together the idea, I spitballed my idea towards him. Well, where I come from, the government has a cabinet function. I can appoint specific people to places and let them micromanage from there. I see. I already oversee the interior. The question is who wants to oversee the military. He replied as he smashed his teeth together thoughtfully. That was very true. Right off the bat, that discounted Ricard and Flint, mostly since I needed them in the stronghold. They had a presence there that was irreplaceable for all intents and purposes. Alessia, would you like that spot? If I was going to be honest, I really didn't want her to take it. It would mean that she would be away more, and a part of me really didn't like the idea of that. Relief flooded my body when I saw her shake her head. I'm afraid not. My duty is for you. Above that, I oversee the Praetorians, so I am unable and unwilling to interact with the military outside of an advisor role. I juggled her words as she threw them at me. At least she was being honest. It made sense, though. Her entire job title was to act as my right hand. Not to mention that my bodyguards are more akin to an actual military than a small protection force now. Not that I was complaining about it. I needed to get an updated headcount from Alessia after this meeting, so I know what I was working with. I see. In that case, I will need to create someone to oversee the military then. That way, I can mass create and then allow them to deploy the troops as needed. I highly doubt I could give my mob creation ability, but I didn't want to even if I did. Very well. That would give us the interior and military. Alessia, would you mind filling the role of internal security then? You do have an entire order of assassins at your command, no? Alessia's gaze drifted back to us as if she were lost in the sea of her own thoughts. Her arms were wrapped around Nyx, who was still out cold and looked as peaceful as could be. What do you mean by that, Lord Karen? Well, you would essentially build a massive network of spies and informants through Asteria, with the sole purpose of gathering information and deterring threats against the land and her people. Karen's eyes seemed to vary in the faint light while I watched on. I didn't realize that we had an entire order of assassins. Perhaps a meeting with Alessia was in order after all. Maybe I'll bring it up during the meeting later. While I agree with what you said, I still do not wish to leave the Empress's side, as that is not something that I am comfortable with. However, I will second Amari to it since that is what she is in charge of. She ran her fingers through Nyx's hair, and the sight made me melt. I was so happy that she and Nyx got along. It was the cutest thing I've seen in a while. So Amari will function as the head of interior security? That works for me. We just have to settle on a better name for the title then. Perhaps Spymaster or something of the sort. But let me write this all down real quick. I reached out and swiped my notebook up along with a pen and flipped through the pages, trying to find a blank one. I was burning through each page, like firewood, and it was getting harder to keep track of everything. So, more than likely, I will create a boss that will function as the head of the armed forces. That way, they will have some sort of intelligence and will act autonomously. Speaking of which, can we allow Amari to function freely then? Not that I didn't trust her, but I haven't really interacted with her recently, so I wasn't sure of her mental state. She is close to sentience. I'm sure if you give her a soft nudge, she will awaken. Double so if you make her a boss. I thought it over and nixed the idea of making her a boss. I only had 3 more slots to work with at the moment, and one was going to be tied up to make a character that would preside over the military. Perhaps after this, we will see what can be done. If you think that this is best for her, I will consider it. However, I want to see if she wants that before we push further ahead. Now, we have filled out 4 roles. I want a 5th that focuses on technology and pushing Asteria forward. What would you recommend, Karen? You know, most domains are content in living in a cycle of death and expansion. So this is mostly uncharted territory. I'll speak to Redrick next time I see him and see if he can start procuring more information from the outside world, and we can see what can be done. What exactly do you have in mind? He fidgeted with his robe and sat forward in his chair. Well, there are many concepts that I want to explore. There are things from where I come from that I took for granted and that I want to see here. While I may not know how to recreate many things, I still have the desire to see what I can do here, especially in a world of magic. This isn't just a domain filled with magical beasts at the end of the day. This is my home, and I want to see it become the best version of itself possible. I placed my pen on the notebook and interlaced my fingers as I stared at Karen. I refused to see anyone in this domain as a mindless monster. These were all living beings, and they deserve to have a life that they can live to the fullest. I won't be just another run-of-the-mill domain. That is admirable. I will do my best to see that your wish is made, mistress. Thank you, Karen. On to the next topic at hand. How is the overall domain functioning? I sat back and stretched my legs out under the desk a bit. Sitting here for long periods really did a number on my legs. Honestly, I'd much rather be standing, but I still had an image I was in the middle of crafting. Fairly well. The overall mob strength is decent for the level. There have been a few outliers, but the captain does a good job of holding them back. The only interesting thing is that the adventurers have converted an outpost into a small living area. If left alone, we project it could evolve into a small town. The skeleton clicked his teeth together once more thoughtfully. That was interesting. It adds a dynamic that I'm sure I could put to good use. What do you suppose we do about it, Karen? Well, 2 things, really. The first is that we could kill them overnight and take the essence and all of their gear. The second is that we can leave them be, collect essence from them over time, and collect various resources from them. Especially if they keep growing. Really, both benefit us in the end. Those were really the only 2 options? Either kill them off or let them stay and use them as a farm. Both didn't sit well with me, but I still had to place Asteria's needs above my own desire. If I let them live, then in a way, it could provide peace of mind to the outside world that I pose no threat to them. It would give me much needed resources, and on top of that crafted gear, I could use. I could even afford to outfit my military correctly, rather than just the hodgepodge of equipment that they currently now. I mindlessly grabbed my pen and messed with it as I weighed all my options. I neither desired to kill them off nor did I want to use them like cattle. But at the same time, the benefits were just too good for letting them do nothing but stick around. But I know what needs to be done. With a heavy heart, I set my pen down. Karen, I propose we let them remain as they are. I'll stretch the land between them and the stronghold, so the tensions stay somewhat low. We can also use them as a buffer and a sign of goodwill to the outside world that we mean no immediate harm. The question is, do we want to reveal ourselves and strike a deal with them, or do we stay quiet and let them live their lives? As the words left my mouth, a bitter feeling set in. This all felt so wrong, yet it had to be done. Well, that depends on you. You can either let them live freely, or you can try to exert some influence on them. His teeth clicked together as he spoke, bearing into me the gravity of his words. I really didn't want to interfere with them. If it was up to me, I'd leave them alone, and I would want them to do the same, but alas, that was out of my control. We were stuck in this cruel cycle. I suppose we can try to open up negotiations with them then. Though they are not like Redrick or Cato, it may be more difficult to sway them to our cause. But I'm still undecided on my path. A show of force then may do the trick then. Though it has to be orchestrated to put them more at ease. Perhaps you can manipulate a few of the ferals to attack them and then run in and rescue them. He stared at me, his blood-red eyes unblinking as they bore into me. The thought of directly attacking them, though, made me feel weird. They were still human, or something close to it. But lately, everything has become more of a blur for me, and I'm not sure what was right or wrong anymore. It felt like everything I knew was slowly fading away. Perhaps. I would prefer to keep everything somewhat peaceful. The less blood we spill, the better the results. I don't want to scare them away after all. That would be wise. They are touchy creatures indeed. He chittered quietly as he slowly nodded his head. I wanted to be taken aback by the comment, but really, it made sense. As humans, we were prone to be hateful to things that we didn't understand. On top of being so firm in our beliefs that anything that differed from them, we viewed it negatively. I'll think of a plan, and then from there, we can get back together and see what we can do, if even at all. I rested back in my chair and crossed my arms as I weighed the various thoughts at hand. There was so much to consider, and right now, I was in a fragile place. One wrong move and I risk losing everything that I've worked for. I understand. Also, before our meeting concludes, two people wish to speak to you. They have a special problem that they believe only you can solve. I tore my gaze away from the ceiling and glanced at him. Oh? What might that be, then? Do you remember those other two adventurers who visited here with Redrick? The male's name is Carter, and he wants to know if you can break a curse. I told him I would check with you about it. He said he would pay you well for your services. As he spoke, he waved his hand, and a small pouch appeared from the maw of his robe and fell onto the table with a heavy thud. I reached forward, grabbed the pouch, and saw many spherical objects nestled into it. I rummaged through and saw that there were 4. The first was roughly the size of my hand and gleamed in the light as a warmth radiated from deep within it. As my fingers ran across its glass-like surface, a fire seemed to come to life and quickly enveloped the interior, shifting it from a gloomy gray into a brilliant red as the fire quickly spread across its surface. Common fire core, a core of compressed fire mana from a lesser salamander. The fire roars and struggles against its cage, desperate to be released. Charge, 100%. The words floated across my vision as I held the orb, which only seemed to grow hotter. Not that it bothered me, I had a high heat tolerance. But I wouldn't risk anything. I set the core down on the table and wondered what I could use these things for. They could even be a ticket for me to use magic. I reached into the bag and withdrew another. The sphere was the darkest shade of blue I've ever laid my eyes on this time. The surface seemed to ripple, and it felt like small waves were traveling down the length of my fingers in a rhythmic, incessant motion that chased away the lingering heat from the fire core. Common water core, a core of compressed water mana from a lesser Thavian seahorse. The water within brings life, yet it is uncaring, like the ocean it came from, and will drown any who disrespect it. Charge 100%. So this was a water core, huh? The system keeps telling me it's a compressed mana core, which was self-explanatory. Perhaps mana is cultivated the same way I cultivate my soul and my ki. There really was so much that I had no clue about. Really, it made me feel a little uneasy, but each little helped. The question is, what do I use these for? I reached back into the bag and withdrew an orb that seemed to glitter like the night sky. Tiny sprinkles of light lay plastered across a surface of a strange hybrid of purple and blue. It wasn't quite violet, nor was it indigo. Just a strange blend that looked otherworldly. As it sat in the palm of my hand, it felt as if a force was pressing it downwards. At first, it wasn't enough to bother me, yet the longer that I held it, the heavier it seemed to become. Common gravity core, a core of compressed gravity mana from a gravitronic mylar. A force shrouded in mystery yet is a fundamental force of creation. Be wary, for it is unforgiving of friend, foe, and self. Charge, 100%. So gravity is considered a variant of magic here? That was interesting. I know on Earth, no one had any idea what caused gravity. There was speculation and many theories but no definitive answers. Honestly, I wonder just how much the law of physics differs here. Perhaps I could use that to my advantage. I reached back into the bag and grabbed the last of the orbs. This time it was a gray orb, with smudges of white that seemed to crawl lazily across its surface. Slight breezes of wind gently traced the lengths of my fingers as I clasped the orb. Common air core, a core of compressed air mana from a Corinthian Bellomosa. The air within lazes about, at least until its fury is provoked. Charge 100%. This really wasn't a bad haul. It was just a matter of figuring out what to do with them and how to use them. I carefully gathered everything back up and placed the bag to the side. Karen, what do I use these for? Mana cores function as a focal point for mana. However, they are limited in use and can be recharged. However, they can never be upgraded to the next tier. He clicked his teeth once more than he spoke, and his red eyes seemed to fade slightly. So in a way, they function as batteries? That's pretty cool. They will definitely come in handy for tests. I see. Well, thank you. Tell Carter that I will be unavailable for the time being. However, you are welcome to help him. I grabbed the bag and placed it under my desk as I tried to think of immediate use for it, but sadly, I came up short. I will inform him. I believe that is all that has to be discussed for now. Call me when you have figured out the plan for the outpost. He stood up and gave me a bow. I pursed my lips and nodded. Stay safe out there, Karen. A part of me wished he would stick around longer, but there was so much that needed to be done. One day, I suppose, but not today. He gave me one last nod as he drew his hood over his head and vanished in a muted display of light, leaving me in my office with the two girls. I turned my attention to Alessia and saw that Nyx was still passed out on her lap, snoring quietly. So Alessia, tell me about the Praetorians. What have I been missing? Well, I reformed them and introduced new ranks into the structure. Neophyte is still the lowest tier, next to private and sergeant. Above that is a lieutenant, and then I introduced the commander rank, with myself as the general. She whispered to not wake Nyx as she slowly stroked her hair. That damn child is going to be so spoiled. But I'm glad that Alessia is taking the initiative and correcting anything that may be a problem. This is precisely why I wanted to make someone govern over the military. At the end of the day, I want everything to be run like a well-oiled machine. I see. Tell me about the current formation of the Guard and any changes that may have occurred. Well, it's currently split into 4 divisions. The first is the Hoplite Division, which acts as a defensive unit. The next is the Vanguard, which operates with the knights and other troops that will not function well in a defensive setting. Next up is the Assassination Division, which is self-explanatory. The final one is the Palatine Guard, which is a restricted unit that only operates within the palace walls and only answers to you or myself. That is very interesting. The Guard is now fragmented, yet they seem to operate with a military capacity outside of a select unit of bodyguards. It was something far more significant than when I first imagined it. Perhaps when I create the War Master, I can further reform the military and make it something that I can indeed be proud of. There truly was so much that needed to be done. After reassuring Nyx that I would play with her after making the next boss and ushering her out, I sat in my office and stared at the ceiling, juggling all of my thoughts. There was so much going on, so a lot of the work was piled on top of me. I groaned and leaned forward, resting my head against the table. The coolness of the wood pressed against my head, and I let out another short groan. This was so much work. Not to mention I needed to get back to the expansion and keep running that. At the moment, the veterans were constructing many buildings and populating them with items. I still needed to finish laying the concrete down for the roads and ensure they would last the wear and tear. Thank God I asked Karen to deal with the negotiations. Otherwise, I may have had a mental breakdown. I took a deep, steadying breath, sat up, and cleared my throat. For now, I just need to take care of this boss, and then I can focus on other things. I reached out across the desk and grabbed my notebook and pen. Now, what did I want this character to be like? I flipped open the page and tapped my pen against the paper as my mind wandered. Each tap of the pen echoed in my mind as I felt my mental grip slip. In a way, it was much like the allure of sleep, but this was something more. Another tap, I felt my head grow fuzzy, and a voice slithered its way into my mind. The voice, I recognized as my own, but the words didn't feel like mine. Octavian Varus, thank you for giving me your time. As the words seeped into my mind, my office seemed to change around me, as a strange fog seemed to seep in from the walls. A warm orange light fought its way through a stained glass window on my far right, basking the room in a steady glow. Across from me was a large man standing, who stood well over 2 meters tall. The warm light kissed a face that was marred by a countless number of scars that cross each other almost endlessly. A set of storm-gray eyes were locked onto me as if he were trying to see through me. No, Empress, the honor is mine. His voice was far deeper than any voice I've ever heard, and he flourished a bow with ease. His battle uniform was perfectly straightened and hardly wrinkled as it reacted to his movements. Please, take a seat. I know the journey here was a long one. My voice sounded weak and almost pathetic next to the man I now knew as Octavian. I struggled to speak once more, but the words didn't leave my mouth. In fact, it was as if I wasn't in control of my body. Without another word, the large man sat down in a finely designed chair, which struggled to hold his entire body. I reached forward and grabbed a small porcelain cup covered in a myriad of flower designs. A tiny waft of steam slowly rose into the air as I swirled it around and took stock of the man before. I know my summon was rather unexpected and rushed, but you see, I need someone with your expertise. Not to mention, reputation. The haze that seemed to crowd around the man slowly pushed to the side as more of his facial features became visible. His flesh was sun-kissed and had a slight leathery appearance as if it were dried from the constant exposure to the light. His nose was prominent, and his cheeks well-defined. Honestly, he was a very handsome man, though in a rugged way. What do you need from me? His voice boomed once more as he spoke. I swirled around the cup of liquid, and the familiar scent of tea tickled my nose. Instead of answering, I brought the cup up to my lips, and the hot liquid rushed into my mouth. I could taste soft notes of vanilla interlaced with orange and honey as the tea coated my tongue and mingled with my taste buds. This was by far the most exquisite tea I've ever had. As you know, we are beset on all sides by various forces. Not to mention the rise of the mortuary cult in the capital. Even the counts in the western states are struggling to fend off the Tyrrhenian threat. Morale is at an all-time low. Octavian nodded his head as he reached up with a massive hand and ran it across a shaved head. Yes, I am well aware. Many of the nobles are calling for your removal and are even now trying to get you dethroned. I could feel my body shrug as I watched helplessly. When the snakes rise to greet the sun, they will only meet an icy blade. The tea once more flooded my mouth, and even though I was struggling to escape, I couldn't help but be relaxed by the warmth that seemed to radiate from the liquid. Ah yes. Many whisper that you are much like a dragon, yet you seem to be far more than that. Octavian nodded his head once, understanding the importance of my words. Many think that I am weak. That Asteria is ripe for conquest. Many are making their moves, trying to capsize off the death of my father. I leaned forward and set the cup down. But they will realize their mistake once it's too late, of course. However, because of some unforeseen events arising, I'm forced to play my hand slightly earlier than planned. You can plan for 1,000 years, yet all it takes is for a single person to bring it to ruin. Octavian crossed his arms as he spoke. His clothing threatened to burst from the sheer amount of muscle that lay just under the surface. Precisely. Which is why I have called you here today. I wish to appoint you as my war master. My words filled the room and chased away all of the other sounds. Empress, I am not worthy of that title. All the color in Octavian's face faded away as he pushed himself from his chair and fell to his knees in front of me. Do not dishonor me by lying, Octavian. For all the years you have served my country and my father, you have never sought fame nor fortune. I know very well of your feats and the respect that you command. I know of your character and the standards you hold yourself to. For years, I've watched you turn away the empty triumphs that many seek. I will never bring you dishonor by giving you the same level of pomp that many of your colleges so desire. For you have never sought it. Instead, I am giving you what you so rightfully earned. Rise Octavian, not as a tribune of my legions, but as my war master. I stood from my chair, looking down at him. The words that left my mouth seemed so alien, yet I could only look on with pride as I saw myself in a different light. As the empress and woman I desired to be. For a few heartbeats, the air hung still as he rose to a knee. His gray eyes alight with silent fury. I understand, Empress. I will not fail you, nor will I bring dishonor to your name. I stood there, gazing at him. From henceforth, you will now control all of my legions as if they were your own. Every order that you issue will be as if they came from my mouth. From this day forward, you will be known as War Master Octavian. Rise now, and take your mantle, and crush all who oppose me. The man rose from his knees, standing many heads taller than me, yet, at this moment, he looked oh so small. I will begin immediately, Empress. The man's words, though whispered, were as loud as thunder in my ears. He placed his hand over his heart and gave me one last bow. I stepped back and opened up a small compartment in my desk, and withdrew a ring. Across its surface was a finely etched design of a comet falling from the sky, shadowing a single sword clad in radiant flame encased by a golden frame. Instead of replying, I extended my hand towards him, with the ring nestled gently in the palm of my hand. He reached out his large fingers, dwarfing my hand, and gently plucked the ring from me, which quickly expanded to match the size of his finger perfectly. Without a second thought, he slid the ring onto his finger, and any sense of trepidation seemed to melt away. Before, I stood a man with a renewed sense of purpose and will. The man who will help me defend Asteria. As I sat down back in my chair, I stared at him once more, and thoughts that weren't my own seeped in once again. In my eyes, he was a paragon of my empire and a man who was worthy of my hand in marriage. Yet, I also knew that my heart belonged to another. But as I tried to ply the thoughts that swam through my mind, they slowly faded. Just as I was about to discover the answer, it slipped from my grasp and with it, all the fog that had settled. My head pounded as I tried to figure out what had occurred, at least until a script rolled across my vision. You have created a new boss. Name, Octavian Varus. Title, War Master of Asteria. Class, Martial Soul. Race, Asterian Revenant. Congratulations! You have created a unique mob. Plus 1000 essence. Asterian Revenant, once a living being of the Asterian Empire, its body and soul has risen to serve the Empress once more. Neither blade nor magic will stay its hand, nor can it be led astray. It is driven by an overwhelming sense of duty and will stop at nothing to see that its task is completed. I tore my eyes from the screen and towards the massive man that now stood in my room. His once sun-kissed skin, now gray and decrepit. His uniform was ruined and covered in dried blood. Though as terrible as he may look, his eyes radiated a sense of power and intelligence that few could match. His eyes fell on me, and with a swift movement, he took a knee before me. Empress, you have called, and I answered. Allow me to serve you once more. His voice was still as deep as it was in that vision, and yet it was filled with sadness that seemed to leak off of each word. Just what the hell was going on? Everything will be okay, Calixa. Just keep it together. Get with Karen to see what can be done. In the meantime, just deal with the situation at hand. I took a deep breath and stared at the massive man who knelt before me. His hand was crossed over his heart, and his face averted towards the ground. Need you ask? The words left my mouth, and mentally I was taken aback by the words that left my mouth. A part of me felt like I was losing control of my life and body, and I wasn't okay with it. I failed you, I failed your father, and above all else, I failed Asteria. His voice boomed in my ear like thunder as he hung his head even lower. The shame of actions that were never even true hung heavy on his form, pressing him onto the ground. I stared at him as I tried to steady my mind. Judging from what I knew of him, it would insult him if I told him that everything would be okay, so instead, I needed to take a different approach. Things didn't go as planned. However, I have awakened you once more, for I find myself in dire need of your skills. Consider it a chance to redeem yourself. The words sat on my tongue like a bar of lead as I spoke. They were cold, but something gnawed at my mind that this would be the right way to go. He stared at the ground, and for a few tense heartbeats, we spared no words between us. I understand, Empress. What do you require of me? He stood up, and the heaviness that pressed down on him seemed to melt away and be replaced by fiery passion. Asteria is in disarray, my legions are fractured, and above all else, we are in unfamiliar territory. I require your assistance in sifting through the ash of my fallen empire and restoring it back to what it once was. I crossed my legs and stared up at the hulking mass of a man, who overshadowed me with ease, mustering all the strength I could to project any sense of power towards the man. His gray eyes lit anew as if a flame had been sparked once more. I understand. How many troops do we have at our disposal? His voice boomed once more, but this time with a sense of purpose. Good, I'm glad he chose to drop this, for now at least. The First Legion, and my guard, is all I can spare at the moment, plus whatever reinforcement that I can muster. In all reality, it wasn't that bad. I could summon however many troops that I needed, but he didn't need to know that sort of information. We all had a role to play, and I wanted to keep it as such. What about the current territorial expanse? Fortress? Towns? He asked once more as he seemed to greedily drink all the information I gave him. We are down to only one stronghold on the outskirts of White Ridge. Town-wise, we have nothing. I rattled off my response, and for once, I felt how small my domain was. I was still in the midst of an expansion after all, yet I couldn't help but feel a little cramped in here. He bobbed his head as his eyes flickered with the etheric flames. There is much work to be done then. Do you have an overview of our current territory? I do. I have a copy here and another in the stronghold. However, I have recently been negotiating with some of the new countries that have moved in. So at the moment, I want to keep any advancements of our military quiet. The less we give them to worry about, the more we can sway things into our favor. I bobbed my foot slightly as I spoke to Octavian. A lot of the panic that I had felt earlier had faded, yet I still had a nagging thought over it, yet with each passing second, it only seemed to grow more and more muted. That would be wise. I will still need to see for myself the current state of the legions to make a proper assessment. The giant mused quietly to himself, though his words were still as loud as ever. I agree. If you would accompany me to the stronghold, then we can make a plan further. I stood up, brushed off my cloak, and grabbed the sword that I had sitting by my desk. What of Lady Alessia? Does she still live? Octavian asked as I strapped on my sword. Ah, yes, she will more than likely be very irate if I left by myself with only the War Master to accompany me. She is taking care of the princess at the moment. I should probably take a few of the honor guards to help reduce her irritation at me leaving. Usually, I would drag her along, but she is taking care of Nyx. I walked over to the office doors, pushed them out gently, and peeked outside. Standing next to the doors were two spirits. The one on my right looked to be a male with a soft face. In a way, I would describe him as angelic, though he was still a bit obscured. The other was a medium-build female and had a sharp, stern face, but just like the other, her face was still a bit hidden. Both had a pair of spears attached to their back, along with a single sword that rested on their hip. Much to my shock, they both seemed a lot more solid than the other spirits here. These must be the Palatine Guard Alessia mentioned earlier. These two would do since there wasn't really a point in taking out the entire Praetorian Guard for a small excursion. Ah yes, the princess. How does she fare? My War Master's voice boomed behind me as I gestured for the two guards to join me in my office. She is well. A bit of a handful at times. She can be rather strong-willed. I replied as I did one last equipment check to ensure that I had everything I may need. Let's see. I have my sports bag, pens, notebook, and everything else. I would expect nothing else. It all runs in the family. I eyed Octavian curiously as I flung my bag across my shoulder. It made me curious how much of it all was imagined or if what he said was actually true or not. The world around me morphed and shifted as my teleportation skill finished. I landed softly on the ground, as did the two Palatine guards accompanying me. On the other hand, Octavian hit the ground hard enough that I swore it trembled as he landed. He indeed was a monster of a man. He stood up and straightened himself out, and then glanced around the stronghold. His fiery eyes dimmed slightly, and sadness seemed to wrap around him like a cloak. How far we have fallen. Were your father still alive, he would have my head. No, my father may be an ass, but I doubt he would do that. Though we may be on two different wavelengths here. I reached up and tried to give him a pat on the shoulder, but alas, he was far too tall for that. I stepped away, glanced around the compound, and saw that it was as busy as usual, with troops running drills and patrols coming in and out. To me, it looked all right, yet from his words alone, I gathered he was disappointed. I knew it wasn't good enough, but to me, I was pretty proud of it. I worked hard to make sure that everything was as efficient as possible. Though I knew that I also had to practice some humility. We would only get through all of this to ensure that everyone got along. If I was gonna be a bitch about things, then nothing would progress. So I was careful to choose my words. There is much work to be done, Octavian. Come, let me show you to the stronghold. I gestured towards the massive building that served as the center of operations. The Palatines kept close to me, with one in front of me, and the other fell a few steps behind me, keeping as close as possible as we walked through the courtyard. The various undead that spotted us all around me slowly began dropping to their knees, placing their hands over their chests above their hearts. I pushed on, ignoring the displays of fealty. After all of this time, I was still very uncomfortable with it. Being seen as someone worthy of taking a knee was something I wasn't quite fond of, but I would allow it to persist, if anything, for morale. The Praetorian in front of me rushed forward and wholly ignored the two guards that stood at their post and pushed open the door for me, which, thankfully, the two undead that stood there didn't seem all that annoyed by the action. Though even if they could say anything, I doubt they would. However, as I strode up the stairs, I noticed a strange feeling that seemed to make its home deep within me. It was a feeling of confidence and strength that seemed to eat away at my doubts and fears, little by little. It was as if nothing truly mattered. Then the task at hand. Even the fear I felt earlier seemed to pale compared to the confidence that was possessing me, and honestly, I think I was starting to not care about anything else. A few weeks later. Have you heard that the domain's military has recently undergone a transformation? Cato's voice seeped into my mind, drawing my attention from counting the coins that I recently made. I tore my eyes away from the stack of coins that sat on my desk. Mentally, I made the note to break away a portion of it to ensure that I could cover some significant purchases for the domain. I've heard some stories, yes, I replied quietly as I swept away a portion of the coins into a bag. According to recent reports, they have restructured the Legion to mirror that of a standard adventurer party. Not only that, they now have access to various forms of magic. Including lunar magic, if that piques your interest any. His blue eyes bore into me as if I were hiding some sort of major secret from him. That is rather interesting. So the domain is evolving then. I sat back in my chair and stared at him. There was only one lunar mage that I knew, and that was Eleanor, who I haven't spoken to in a few days. Not since Carter left me a note explaining that this was his goodbye, which smarted a little considering I thought we were friends, but I would not hold it against him. Saying goodbyes in person can be hard, though it would have been nice to hear his voice one last time. That it is. It's ruffling a fair bit of the nobles, along with the scholars. Supposedly, this isn't just a domain but a fragment of another world. Many wish to explore the domain. However, many of the nations are restricting entry due to the nature of Asteria. Rightly so, some may say, considering the existence of the undead. Cato strode into my chamber and found himself a seat across from me. I too held many reservations about it at first, but after meeting the Empress, I'm inclined to say that she acts very human-like. In fact, when she took an arrow, she visibly reacted to the pain. Not to mention, she seems to have emotion. I quickly rifled around my desk, brought out a small golden bell, and gave it a gentle ring. So I've heard. I've yet to meet her. Cato nodded his head as he crossed his arms across his silken blue shirt. Good luck with that. I highly doubt her bodyguard will let any of us within 4 meters of her. Especially me. I glanced to the right as I saw the door open, and a beautiful young maid walked in. Miranda darling, can you get me some black tea in whatever this gentleman desires, please? She bowed toward us, and her long blonde hair almost scraped the floor from the movement. I'll take a grey tea, please. Cato told her as he kept his eyes locked on me, barely even sparing her his attention. Alessia seems like she is quite the woman. If you can even call her that. Come now, Cato, you shouldn't speak so ill of them. I sat back in my chair and interlaced my fingers behind my head. Do you fault me? Never have we interacted with undead like this. Nor have they defied our expectations in such a way. He narrowed his eyes at me as the faintest traces of a scowl danced across his handsome face. No, I do not. I sighed as I pushed myself forward. Yet, in these last few months since the domain opened, so many questions have arisen. Most of which we still don't have answers for. For instance, why did it appear in the neutral lands? I strummed my fingers across the desk as the thoughts floated across my mind. I don't even think we have any existing maps of the area that it now lives in. The Assyrians torched a lot of the interior maps they had when they were being routed, so only the gods know what may exist there. As he spoke, Miranda wandered back into the room with a platter of steaming tea, held in porcelain cups that glittered from the light that seeped through the windows. I thanked Miranda as she placed the tea on my desk before turning my attention back to Cato. That may be so. But regardless, we all stand to benefit from Asteria. Already, the supplies I was given have been revolutionary. The pens alone have been well received by many, a scribe and nobility. The chef's knives are popular amongst many cooks for the ease of use, and not to mention the prices that I can charge. Ah, Redrick, ever the merchant I see. He quipped as he took a short sip from his steaming cup of tea. It's been a struggle to climb back into prominence, but thankfully the trade deal with Asteria gave me the foothold I needed. Now all that is left is to watch many of the older houses burn for their crimes. As the words left my mouth, I couldn't help but feel a sense of vindication overcome me. Everything I've been working years to attain is now within my grasp, and as one, my plans were slowly coming together. Just be careful not to let that slip in public. Your head may join everyone else who opposed them. He sipped at his tea once more, then silence seemed to fall on us like a warm summer night. At least until one of my butlers appeared in the doorway. Master Redrick, you have a letter from Master Karen waiting for you. Agni, my head butler, gave us all a bow and flicked his white glove-clad hand, and a letter appeared as if the air itself had created it. Oh, I wasn't expecting a correspondence from Sir Karen today. I mused quietly as Agni walked over and placed the letter on my desk. I took it and quickly undid the seal. Redrick, the Empress requests your presence within Asteria in the next 3 days, along with the Corinthian envoy, for an inauguration not since seen well before the fall. We formally invite you and whatever envoy and diplomatic official that wishes to visit. As always, any person with diplomatic immunity will be ignored by the mobs and be treated with respect. During the inauguration, the Empress will provide dining and refreshments. To assuage any fears, none of the food will be prepared by any of the undead. However, we ask that all personal arms and weapons be left behind because of security concerns, as we will provide the event security. We look forward to seeing you. Karen. Well, this is interesting. The words left my mouth as a wave of confusion followed. What is it? Kato sat forward, clearly interested in whatever I just read. Karen said that there will be an inauguration of some sort in a few days and that the Empress invites you and I, along with any other official that wishes to attend. It is said that there will be food and drink provided, matched with even security. I placed the paper on the desk and slid it to him. He took the paper and eyed it warily. That would explain a bit of the rumor that I've heard recently, especially in concerns about a recent militarization. But I don't think there would be anything worthy of a celebration. I shook my head and ran my fingers through my mane of red hair. I'm not sure. I doubt this would be a play to kill us all off. More than likely, this is a display of good faith. As for what, though, I'm not sure. She can be difficult at times to read. The man sighed and put the paper back on my desk. A few nearby states have been petitioning the crown for permission to send envoys to the domain, so I suppose I could pick a few of them to make the journey. It was inevitable. I had only hoped I had more time. He stood up and gave me a nod. I'll be back, feel free to go ahead into the domain. I waved to him as he left and sat back in my chair. This domain was gonna be the death of me. Already, it was a buzzword whispered across the nations, and now it was getting ready to make a major play. But we will find everything out, in time, of course. A few hours later. Greetings, Sir Redrick. Karen's voice greeted me as I pushed through the veil that separated our worlds. Lord Karen, it's always a pleasure. I purred as I gave him a bow. Next to him were two Praetorians that I'd never seen before. Praetorian Sergeant Asterian Blade Master. Praetorian Sergeant Battle Mage. The one on the left was a zombie who looked relatively unscathed. His uniform looked freshly pressed and as if it were brand new, which was comical considering the state of the wearer. His hair was long and clung tightly in greasy strands that defied the wind. The most interesting part, however, was the armor he wore. Instead of the freshly polished plate I would expect, a thick black cloth vest seemed to sit just on the zombie's chest. On various weak points across the zombie's body were additional black cloth pieces, like his forearms, knees, and shoulders. What was the point of them? On the right was a figure shrouded in a magi's robe, one that refracted the rays of the morning sun into kaleidoscopic colors that swirled and danced around it. Its eyes were invisible in the sea of darkness that seemed to spew a few centimeters out of the hood and wrap around it like a strange helmet. I glanced at both of them once more and saw the text above each was more purple than red, and it sent shivers down my spine. These were both closer to bosses than actual mobs. What magic did she possess to field such powerful guards? I thank you for coming. What of the other envoy? Karen asked as he gestured for me to step onto the boat. He has gone to collect a few others who wish to strike up negotiations with Asteria. He will be a day or so behind me. I glanced around the dock and saw that it was bustling with life. A few teams of adventurers were mounting onto boats, with more cloaked ferrymen at their helm. Karen, I see that you have expanded the workforce. I coded my words more in jest than anything else in that moment. Ah yes, it had to be done. The sheer influx of adventurers has been increasing day by day. The only thing that keeps them from killing them is the fear of the river. It has claimed many who thought they could do without paying the toll. His words cut through the warm air with icy coldness as he gestured towards the seat. Sometimes I forgot that with how human he seems, underneath the surface was a monster, just waiting to be released. So, what is this inauguration about? I asked as I gazed across the river. The fog hung heavy in the air and coated everything in its ceaseless miasma. A hero has arisen once more, and with it, so will our empire. His voice was as monotonous as ever, yet it held a twinge of pride. Who is this hero? I tore my gaze away from the river, and towards Karen. The two Praetorians hung just behind him, blending into the fog that seemed to envelop everything. His words were heavy and ominous and chilled me to the core, one of the greatest warriors to have ever lived. A man who is considered having no equal, and the paragon of what it means to be Asterian. The ferryman's words pierced through the fog and rang clearly in my ears. So, the domain has a new boss then. That doesn't bode well for anyone. In fact, the original bosses have yet to be defeated. I honestly feel like the domain was changing faster than we could keep up with. Tell me about him. I gazed out across the river and could hardly see the shapes of the dozens of adventurers on their own ships ahead of us. The fog devoured all but the outlines of their forms as they drifted across the river. He was a loyal tribune of the late Alexander. Now his service is to the Empress. His name is Octavian Varus. The surrounding air grew heavy as if the mere mention of the man was enough for air to bow. I see. I look forward to meeting him then. I kept my words short as I tried to process the information given to me. So, the new boss is a general of some sort. From what it seems, he was a man of high standing. But if he made a return, does that mean the Empress is a necromancer? I felt a sigh leave my lips as a headache slowly took residence in my head. I strummed my fingers across the hull of the boat as I weighed the thousands of thoughts that seemed to overwhelm me. At least until I decided I would wait and see. I would judge the situation accordingly instead of just making assumptions. Karen, did the Empress raise Octavian from the dead? One would assume that, but he came back on his own accord. His strength of will transcends even that of death itself. His words struck another chord of fear within me. For that made him no regular undead. No, that sounded like a revenant. A being who came back from the dead, driven mostly by revenge. Beings like that were never good news, even more so than necromancers, simply because they are almost unkillable, other than the sheer weakness to fire. In fact, one rose recently to kill an adulterer, and it took 2 whole adventurer squads to kill. I shuddered once more, as I thought back to that fateful day, as I watched the decrepit man tear through the town guard as if they were paper, seeking the cause of its wraith. Do we have to fear an imminent invasion then? The trepidation coiled around my heart as the words slipped from my mouth. I was terrified, not just for my sake but for Calixa. Even though I worked my ass to make sure that this domain stayed safe, there were still many who were vying for its destruction. Like wolves circling their prey, they waited for a single slip-up. No, I wouldn't worry about it. Though I will warn you. Octavian isn't the man who wants to expand Asteria's borders. Instead, he will look inwards to restore Asteria to its former glory. While he is aware of the relationship that Asteria has with the outside world, he will not tolerate any harm that may come to the Empress, and he will retaliate if need be. For a brief second, his words hung in the air before they fell away onto the soft gusts of wind that pushed past us. Worry not, Lord Karen, everyone is well aware of that rule, though I will do my best to inform everyone of the consequences properly. I clenched my teeth once I finished speaking and looked forward, balancing the myriad of thoughts at my disposal, before I shrugged them away. It wouldn't do me any good now to sit here and stress over it. The words between us had ended, for now at least, as the boat glided across the river with practiced ease. In the distance, the dock slowly pushed through the fog, and the bustling bodies of dozens of adventurers could be seen as some were hopping off of ships while others were departing. I quickly glanced across them, uncaring at least until I came across the gaze of someone who looked to be no older than 16. His gaze looked to be far, as he stared away from us. It was a look that I knew all too well. He saw some things, and I felt for him. He was too young to be an adventurer, especially in a place like this. Redrick, the Empress, would like to see you, so please follow me. Karen's voice tore me away from gazing at the child, and my focus quickly shifted away from the child, yet a tiny sliver of pity remained. I wish this world could be different. A few hours later, we walked quietly to the stronghold, which felt like it took longer than before to get to. It was as if the distance between the dock and here had stretched. Though it may be my memory failing me. The 2 zombies that stood at attention near the gate saw us and gave Karen a bow before they pushed it open. The metal screeched as it ground against itself. The fog had mostly dissipated since we arrived, revealing a clear sky. The sun roared definitely and against us, chasing off the chill of the morning air. Large clumps of white cotton grouped with each other and were busy on their journey across the sky. All around us, the Legion seemed to be in full swing, doing whatever it was they seemed to always be doing, but this time, they seemed even busier than before, along with an even more significant presence. A vast portion of them were busy tearing down the back section of the stronghold, while another part was busy laying the foundation for another wall that would almost triple the size of the stronghold. In front of that, it looked like they were in the middle of constructing a large building that would overlook the courtyard. Redrick, it's good to see you again. A feminine voice graced my ears, and I stiffened slightly. Empress, I replied as I slowly turned around and saw her. She wore the same outfit as last time, with that strange mask that seemed to defy reality. Behind her, 2 paces away, were 2 spirits, with names shrouded in purple, with bits of orange that were starting to show through. Strapped to each of their backs were 2 spears and a single sword that lay on their hips. The one on the left was clearly a male who seemed to radiate a sense of nobility and serenity. On the right was a female, who regarded me with a stern face. My blood ran cold as I regarded the 2 new mobs. Unlike the others designated as subunits of a particular faction, these bore a single name. The Palatine Guard. I was staring at possibly 2 of the strongest mobs in the domain. I'm glad it's you that came first. Would you mind trying some of the food? She gestured for me to follow her as she walked toward the main building. The two palatines fell in a step right next to her, monitoring me. Their gazes were colder than ice, yet, just beneath the surface, was a fire that raged against a cage, just waiting to be released. Of course. My words came out, jumbled together, as I tried to fight through the shock. She wanted me to try food? That was such an odd request and one that I didn't think I would ever entertain. Don't worry, I went to great lengths to ensure that none of the undead interacted with it. The male palatine rushed up the steps, pushed his way past the two guards, and pressed the door open. The hinges squealed softly as the door swung open, revealing a lobby that seemed to be decorated for a party. A large red carpet lined the center of the floor, and on top of that sat a few tables clad in matching red velvet. On each table were various containers of different sizes that seemed to be composed of silver and were nestled in pairs, much like nesting dolls. A small way, away from the main tables that held all the silver containers, were a few sets of circular tables. Each one had a white tablecloth draped across the surface. There were 4 plates set to each table, with a set of utensils set in a way that looked to be almost foreign to me. This is all so beautiful, I murmured as I soaked in the regal air of what was once a bland hall. I'm glad you think so. I know a thing or two about hosting events. Her voice was more akin to a chuckle as she spoke, and she walked over to one of the metal containers and pulled the lid off. Steam poured from the inner contents as if it were freshly made, and I was struck by a sweet smell. I found my legs seemed to have a mind of their own as they brought me over to the food. I could feel the saliva building up as the smell constantly assaulted my nose. Before my eyes sat a dozen round pastry-like, golden-brown objects and were layered on top of each other. As I got closer to it, I could faintly smell butter, and a few other herbs that I couldn't quite place. What is this? It's a variation of Roman gnocchi. I had to change a few things since I was lacking the ingredients. The strange words clung to my mind as I tried to repeat what I heard, yet my tongue couldn't seem to imitate how the words were spoken. What is it? I kept my hand away from the food, knowing that my resolve was quickly starting to break. It's a variant of pasta, made from potatoes. Do you want to try one? She asked as she grabbed a fork next to the container, along with a small plate. She quickly grabbed one, laid it on the plate, and slid it over to me with deft hands. With a measured movement, I reached out, took the plate, and regarded the food. A part of my mind screamed at me to be wary of the food, yet the other part of me was desperate to see if it tasted as good as it smelt. It's not going to bite you. Her voice pierced the confines of my mind as I stared at the weird pasta-like item that she made as I weighed my choices. I didn't want to appear rude, so I ignored my misgivings, pierced the outer shell with my fork, and brought it to my lips. The smell wafted off up to my nose and gently caressed it, further loosening the last bits of my doubt. I took a deep breath and prepared myself as I brought it closer to my lips. I pushed it into my mouth, tired of teasing myself. The heat radiated off of it in tantalizing waves and tickled my lips. The first wave was the taste of butter, thick with herbs as it flooded into my mouth, which quickly matched the pasta's light, fluffy taste. The flavors quickly melted together into one as I bit into it. This is fantastic. A low chuckle emanated from under her mask as she regarded me with her emerald orbs. I'm glad you think so. Feel free to take a few more. I don't really have a way to keep them right now if you like. She waved her hand as she walked over to a table, pulled a chair out, and sat down. I wandered over to the container and grabbed a few more of whatever she called it, and hurried to the table that she sat at. The palatine stood behind her and stared at me with an icy gaze. Empress, where is Alessia? I glanced nervously once more, then I sat across from her. She's training with Nyx right now. She settled into her chair, interlaced her fingers, and regarded me with a guarded gaze. Ah, yes, the princess. I was still shocked to see that she had a daughter. I was even more shocked to see that she looked to be only 10 years of age. Even though she looked to be mostly human, it was still clear that she wasn't. Scales as black as night adorned her neck and faded into pale alabaster flesh. The most striking appearance, however, was her eyes. They looked just like the ones that were gazing at me now. I'm far too aware of how that goes, I replied to her, but it was more for me in all reality. Do tell. She leaned forward in her seat and interlaced her fingers. I grew up in a noble house, so I was forced to do many things, some of which I never wished to know. I felt the start of a sad smile slowly cross my face as a mixture of regret and nostalgia found its way into my heart. Ah, well, I will only teach her what she needs to know in her case. Nobility has always had such strange customs. Some of which I'm not fond of. She sat back in her chair and crossed her arms. That they do. But it's the way of the world. Saying those words made me feel weak. I wanted to change the world, but I still lacked the influence and power. It would take me a long time to get in a place where I could openly defy the norms without losing my head. That may be so. Where I come from, the nobility is all but extinct. Perhaps it's for the best. She nodded slowly as the words came in a whisper. What could have possibly happened that could ruin that? The words that left my mouth were clad in astonishment. Cultural shifts mostly. Everyone saw that nobility had no merit. Though titles changed, so in a way, they evolved with the times. Not that they are totally extinct, mind you. I tried to wrap my head around the fact that nobility didn't exist for her. Everything has always been split into those who serve and those who rule for all my life. To consider anything other than that really hurts my head a bit. Tell me about where you come from, then. I tried to steer the conversation into an area that I felt a little more comfortable for me, all while trying to gather more information. Really, there isn't much to say. Though I feel that you aren't yet ready to learn about all of that just yet. Besides, you are here for the inauguration, no? She sat forward again and interlaced her fingers. The black of her gloves seemed to drink the light from the various torches that lined the room. For the briefest of seconds, her eyes seemed to flicker as if they were a shifting pool of water. Ah, yes, it reminds me of something that I wanted to talk to you about. I was slightly annoyed that she said I wasn't ready, but I would drop it for now. After all, I came here for something important. Karen tells me that the inauguration is for a hero of some sort for Asteria. Ah yes. It's for Octavian. I've already held the private ceremony, so now it's just for formalities. I see. Well, from what I heard from Karen, I have a cause of concern. Empress, are you a necro? As the words left my mouth, a gust of wind slammed into me, threatening to throw me from my chair. My plate of food was torn away and slammed into the ground with a heavy clatter. That's enough. The Empress' voice ripped through the air like an explosion, and I felt the cold tip of a spear pressed against my throat quiver slightly. The two Palatine guards that stood behind the Empress closed the distance in the time it took to blink and had their weapons drawn. The male had its spear pressed to my neck, and the female drew a long knife and pressed it into my chest. My heart strummed quickly as slivers of white-hot pain danced across my flesh. At the command of the Empress, the two took a step back and quietly sheathed their weapons. But the fury that they restrained earlier was now roaring fire. Please forgive them. No one here likes that word. She gestured for the two to come to join her once more. I quickly smoothed out my shirt and wiped away some of the blood that had come to the surface of my flesh. I suppose I should watch my words. Forgive me. The incident did wonders to restore humility within me and a healthy amount of fear. They moved faster than anything I've ever seen. She cleared her throat and adjusted her cloak. It's all right. I just didn't expect them to react how they did. She cleared her throat and sat back. But to touch on what you said, no. While the dead may listen to my commands, I do not treat them like slaves. Everyone in my empire has a choice, and I will not punish them for it. In the case of Octavian, he came back to life of his own accord and will lead my legions once more, as he did in life. I understand that, I do. The issue is that the outside world may not see things as such. Many are already wary of you and the undead that inhabit your domain. So I suggest that you tread carefully for a time, at least until the world warms up to you. I rubbed the spear's spot and found the flesh warm and still wet with blood. I wouldn't worry about that. Just let me take care of it. Her emerald eyes glittered with wisdom as the words left her mouth with such self-assurance that I couldn't help but agree with her. Yet, I still wondered, what did she have planned? A few days had passed since I last met with the Empress. In that time, I sat in the stronghold and observed how the military was acting. Come to find out, what I heard earlier was true. They were acting much like the adventurer parties that visited here, but at the same time, they turned it into something unique. Each group was called a squad, and they all seemed to function as independent entities, yet at the same time, they seemed to support each other and shore up various weaknesses. As I watched the various war games they were doing, a sense of dread coiled around my heart. They skirmished relentlessly for 2 straight days, and with each passing second, they seemed to grow more robust, and their reactions became smoother. Almost as if an invisible hand was guiding them from above. The first time I saw them fight, I watched for a few hours. At first, it was comical how they shambled together, but they slowly changed. The The squad grew to 5 members, with the addition of an extra mage that served as a defense unit and would intercept incoming magic and provide support to the rest of the squad. However, the most amazing thing was that they interchanged units without an issue and quickly redeployed. A feat that many nations would struggle to contend with. The more I watched them fight, the more I realized that trying to declare war on this domain would be a lengthy and costly endeavor. One that I was sure would not be worth it. I've also been pondering on this new boss that has been spoken about. I have yet to see him in my time here, but I've sensed him, and what I've felt was indescribable. Across from the main building was an entirely constructed overlook that sat high above the courtyard and, in the shadows, radiated a palpable presence even from where I sat. The air felt heavy and thick and seemed like it wanted to strangle me with the amount of force that was pressing onto my chest. The feeling of relentless bloodlust filled every bit of space and sat on my exposed flesh. Whatever was in that darkness was a monster I wasn't sure I wanted to meet. A rap against my door tore me from my thoughts as I gazed out across the courtyard. Enter. I turned around just as the door swung open. Kato, it's a pleasure to see you again. The honeyed words left my mouth as I reached my hand out. Redrick. How do you fare? Kato took my hand and gave it a firm squeeze. Well, how was your trip? I asked as I walked into the small room set aside for me. In the middle was a small cot, a desk with an array of pens, various other writing materials, and the stuff I brought to work on. After all, being an overseer for a bustling dungeon town is no simple task. It went well. I managed to grab a few delegates from a couple of kingdoms that wished to enter into an entente with Asteria, namely from the Empire of Sartok, the Thelia Confederacy, the Tezcatlipoca dynasty, and a couple of smaller kingdoms. The most notable would be the Principality of Arton. He walked close behind me and pulled out a chair as I walked across my room. I was hoping for a few bigger players to try and secure a spot, but I suppose it's to be expected. Velcrest has a chokehold on many kingdoms. I sighed as I sat in my chair and thought about the various delegates he mentioned. Sartok came as no surprise. They have been on the decline for many years, though a comeback may be in the works with the new king at its helm. The Thelians were a bit of a surprise since they were isolationist, but with mounting pressure from Velcrest, they may be trying to secure a base of power to make a stand. The Tezcatlipoca presence was unexpected but not entirely unwelcome. They keep to themselves, so I wonder what drove them to send delegates here. As for the Principality, well, that makes me entirely weary. They are almost as xenophobic as Velcrest, and they may cause problems down the road. Personally, I'm quite happy with the turnout. If we can broker agreements between Corinthia and them and keep Asteria in the mix, we may threaten the theocratic confederations to the north. But, we should see what is to come and act accordingly. After all, it is never wise to jump too far ahead with plans. The man sat down across from me and affixed me with his piercing blue eyes. Indeed, we will be in a suitable spot if we can broker an agreement between even the Thelians and Tezcatlipoca. However, if they are making moves, things must be dire. If two of the most well-renowned of the beast-kin nations were trying to establish ties, then something dreadful must be happening within their borders. However, due to the general treatment of their citizens in surrounding countries, they keep more to themselves, which really limits the information that I have on them. The biggest issue that I can see occurring would be the slave traders that have been harrying us for quite some time. Even though it's illegal in our borders, much of the nobility will turn a blind eye as long as their pockets are lined. As he spoke, a small glimmer of irritation grew in my chest. It was always the old houses that did this. Money was a driving factor in their day-to-day operations, and any who opposed that were cut down. But it made me think back on what the Empress said a few days ago to me, about the lack of nobility from where she came. How much better it must be. But alas, this is how it had to be, sadly. I have to tread eggshells to keep a position I earned once more. I will do my best to clean out the slavers from the city I govern. It should do wonders on improving our diplomacy between everyone. Though I will be much more of a target because of it. The king recognizes your service, Redrick. Once we purge most of the older houses, you will be rewarded for your service. However, I will see if I can grab a few of his honor guards to keep you safe. With each passing day, we maneuver ourselves into a really advantageous position, and with Asteria's help, we may yet be able to work in the light of day. Kato stood up, walked over to the small window, and gazed out across the courtyard, where I would assume the troops were still training even now. At first, when I came to this domain, it was merely to reclaim my noble titles, but now I'm waging a secret war for the king and negotiating with the undead. I sighed as I sat back and stared at the ceiling. This was all so much, and I wasn't expecting to live like this. I would have happily lived the last of my days in a manor, in the countryside, far away from whatever shit storm that was brewing in this world. Do you think this is what I want to be doing either, Redrick? I am one of the few people that the king trusts, and that means that I have to be here, negotiating with a charismatic skeleton, who, in turn, talks to an empress, who I have yet to meet. We are juggling more than just our reputation with this, and that alone is enough to unnerve me. His words were spoken in a whisper that was slathered in the weight of what we were doing. I will do my best to try to get you an audience with her if that will help assuage your fears, Cato. But I can't promise it. It's all right. I'm sure that I will meet her soon enough. He turned around and strolled back to his chair. More than likely, yes, she isn't what you would expect, though. I sat up once more and thought back to the few times I had met her. Most of it was awkward, yet she didn't strike me as someone guided by greed or power. If anything, it was a breath of fresh air. As he went to reply, a soft rap on the door interrupted our conversation. Enter. I tore my attention away from Cato and towards the door, which swung open on silent hinges, revealing Karen. Greetings. The Empress has informed me that dinner is ready, and everyone may eat. If you two would follow me to the dining hall. He stepped to the side and gestured for us to leave. Cato and I shared a quick gaze, with the unspoken passing between us, before we stood up and followed Karen out of the guest room. Whatever thoughts I had earlier were replaced with my stomach rumbling, eager to eat some more of that delicious food. Maybe I could talk her into giving me the recipe or making me a bunch to take to the outside world. The two zombie guards at the door saw us and quickly opened it, revealing the dining hall that I was at earlier. Though the inside was much more extravagant than before. The tables were rearranged and underneath all the containers was a small silver coin-shaped candle that licked the bottom of the metal. The various torches that lined the pillars were moved and replaced with small clusters of candles that sat in scones. Tables that once filled the room were gone, leaving only a couple that held candles in the center. The various plates that I saw sitting there before had vanished and were replaced by plates made of pure silver and matched by utensils made of pure gold. The entire room now radiated a quiet elegance that many would struggle to compare. A few ambassadors were seated at the tables, though not as many as I would have hoped. At first glance, I could make out the Thelian, who looked to be a lumbering beast man of some sort, covered head to tail in brown fur that barely hid the muscle that rippled underneath. A set of large horns was on his head that curved in on themselves. His snout was large and prominent yet was covered in a myriad of scars that crisscrossed his face. If I wasn't mistaken, that was a minotaur. Beasts renowned for both their strength and their boundless intelligence. Next to him was a small woman who had long flowing black hair. Instead of flesh, there were scales the color of freshly fallen spring and glittered in the warm candlelight. Her eyes were slightly slanted and looked as if they came directly from a serpent. She wore a radiant violet silken dress that clung to her curvy form. She must be a half-breed. This would also be why she would be an ambassador, which also told me she was from the dynasty. If anything, I would say she was a natural beauty. Next to her was a man clad in the traditional outfit of Arton, which was a loose-fitted shirt, that was the color of the setting sun, matched with a pair of white trousers that flared out near the bottom, along with a few ribbons of various colors wrapped around his waist. His flesh was the color of copper and seemed to be covered in dozens of wrinkles, and his face was, although neutral, still held a bit of disgust. He may be a bit of a problem, so I would have to watch him. The rest of the ambassadors around didn't mean that much to me since they came from smaller kingdoms. I would leave them be, for now, and see what deals can be cut. Without a second thought, I strode across the dining hall with Cato and towards one of the empty tables. Well, empty mostly. Outside of the plates and glasses of red wine that adorned the tables. I glanced at Cato before I glanced back at Karen, who stood in the middle of the room. He reached out, took a wine glass and a knife, and quickly tapped it against the edge. The sound overrode the quiet murmur that filled the room. Ladies and gentlemen, Lady Asteria thanks you for coming to the inauguration and hopes that your journey here was safe. She also wants me to pass on the message that all the food made was done so with full safety in mind. The food is open as a banquet, so feel free to take as much as you like. After the ceremony, I will spend some time with each of you. Anyway, enjoy the food. He set the wine glass down on the table and gave us one last look before stepping back into the shadows. So she expects us to get our own food? Cato glanced over at the table with a hint of scorn on his face. Well, she made it clear that the undead will have no part in dealing with the food, so it would make sense why you would have to serve yourself. I shrugged as I grabbed my plate and stood up. I wasn't perturbed by doing this. In a way, it was thoughtful of her. Instead of a reply, Hitsuge grabbed his plate and followed me over to the table. Clearly, everyone else was slightly annoyed that they had to get the food themselves, based on the murmur that filled the room. I pulled the lid off the closest container and saw that the pasta from the other day was the first food option. However, instead of a fork, it was a set of metal utensils connected near the top by a curved piece of metal. I gripped it, gave it a slight squeeze, and saw that they pressed against each other like a set of pincers. I reached in and grabbed a few pieces of the pasta before moving on to the next one. Within this one sat strange food stuff shaped like small pipes that sat in a white milky substance. It smelled good, though, so I would still try it, especially if it tasted as good as that stuff did the other day. Next up was a salad of some sort, filled with peppers and really fluffy bread. I grabbed a healthy portion of each and walked back over to my table, excited to try the food that was at hand. There was still other stuff up on the table, but I would go back up for more, soon at least. A few hours later. The wind outside picked up as the sun started its journey to cross the horizon. Dark clouds were slowly traversing the sky, bringing in the smell of petrichor and cool air. It was going to rain, possibly quite soon, but thankfully, we were all seated under a veranda that overlooked the courtyard where a legion of undead stood. Hundreds of undead stood at the ready, with their weapons sheathed. But even with the sheer number of undead that had arrived, there were still more patrolling the walls and even more that were leaving the stronghold. The sheer number of troops that sat here was astounding. Granted that most countries could bring to bear more troops, this was frightening for what this was. If the Empress broke our packs, she could easily overwhelm many towns and cities with the sheer amount of troops that sat here. What's on your mind, Kato? I tore my attention away from the legion that stood at attention and towards my companion. The military here. It poses a grave threat. The words he spoke mirrored that of what I thought. I agree. Thankfully, she doesn't seem interested in the world outside of here. So you say, Redrick, so you say. His words were filled to the brim with doubt, and I didn't blame him. Sometimes, even I doubt it. However, before I could speak, Karen's voice tore through the ambient murmur of the assembled ambassadors. Honored delegates. I thank you for coming to the ceremony. Lady Asteria will arrive at any moment, and we may begin our proceeding. He stood on the outlook, gazing down on us with burning red eyes. At the mention of the Empress, the legion snapped to attention even more than they were before. The sound of hundreds of boots slamming into the ground filled the air, silencing the last of the murmurs that continued on. For a few brief seconds, everyone held a collective breath, and in the distance, I could hear the sound of hundreds of more feet that marched in perfect synchrony. Kato, maybe now you will meet her. I leaned in close to Kato and whispered in his ear. His jaw clenched as he stared at the gate. The sound of marching troops grew louder as the air whipped around us, as dozens of smells in the air intermingled. A few agonizing seconds later, the gate swung open and squealed softly on its hinges. As the door opened, we were greeted by the sight of hundreds of warriors clad in gleaming gold and deep purple. The troops in front bore shields as large as they were, with the face of an enormous beast painted onto the surface. In its eyes was an etheric fire, and its giant maw turned towards the sky as if it were defying the gods. Spear tips gleamed angrily in the dying light. As they were the first to march into the stronghold, their names were a sea of red and purple as they marched in. Their lifeless eyes, staring straight ahead, I felt as if I was standing before an audience. They marched in perfect formation, taking an empty spot next to the legion. There were dozens more zombies and skeletons behind them that marched in lockstep. Their purple uniform stood in stark contrast to the golden armor that looked much like the stuff that the guard that accompanied Karen wore. Some wore polished armors of full plate, while others had simple curved swords that hung from their hips and wore that strange vest-like armor. As one, they broke off from the formation and took positions against the wall, encircling the stronghold's interior. Behind them marched a small group of only 13 cloaks garbed undead. Their violet cloak held traces of gold that glittered softly in the dusk light. Ethereal blue eyes glimmered from the depths of darkness that thrived just under the hood. I quickly analyzed them and saw that they were Praetorian battle mages and were all tinged red. As they passed through the gate's arch, they broke away and filled in next to all the other guards who stood at the wall's interior. Next, there were only 5 instead of a final formation walking through the door. The Empress, who wore her standard cloak, which seemed to be very muted and dull compared to the display of power I just witnessed. Next to her was Nyx, who wore a black dress that seemed to swirl and eat in the air as if they were flames composed of darkness. She held her head high and proudly held her mother's hand as she walked. Next to those two was Alessia. Her silver hair danced in the air, and her golden eyes raged with an unbidden wrath. Her flesh seemed to flicker in and out of reality as the light passed through her without issue. She was the only one out of the honor guard who lacked armor, yet I knew she didn't need it. The remaining two were the Palatine guard that accompanied her the last time I met her, and this time they were clad in very light armor, and both wore a cloak, much like the Magi that marched through mere moments before. This was the army that would easily tear through the outside world. Could they be defeated? Yes, but at a cost. The sheer strength that the Empress possessed was a sight to behold, even more so at the presence of what I would assume was the entirety of her honor guard. Woe for those who would dare garner her wraith. Lady Asteria, your legions await you. Karen's voice echoed across the courtyard as clear as day before fading away in the wind that seemed to kick up even more. The Empress' cloak flapped idly on the wind as she stood there, taking in the sight of the legions that stood before her. Her eyes scanned the entirety of the troops that stood here, at least until they passed over us. Behind her gaze, it felt like there was a monster gazing at us, just below the surface, yearning for release. It sent a wave of shivers down my spine as sweat formed beads on my forehead. After an agonizingly slow eternity, her eyes left me, and she strode forth between her soldiers. The breath that I didn't realize I was holding escaped from my lips, and I sank into my seat. At this moment, she felt so much different. In a way, she seemed so much more severe and unyielding. Next to me, the sound of weeping filled my ears. They weren't the tears of sorrow but the tears of a pilgrim who had just completed a journey. By the gods, the great ancestors, they are here. The halfling that sat a few seats away stared at the Empress. Tears streamed down her face, scintillating in the last few rays of sunlight that broke through the storm clouds brewing overhead. What do you mean? I tore my gaze away as the weeping slowly grew quiet. The Empress bears the soul of a dragon, and the child is one herself. They are in the same family as the great ancestors. The woman wiped away the tears that had run freely down her face. So that's what that monster on the shield was. Dragons rarely left the Aberthal Mountains. In fact, it was so rare that many considered them extinct. The last confirmed sighting of a dragon was many millennia ago, just before the fall of the Assyrians. But the fact that the Empress bears the soul of one raises more questions than answers. I pulled my gaze away from the halfling's face and back to the Empress, who was walking through the rows of her troops. Once she reached the front of the formation, Alessia spun on the heel of her foot, and her burning gaze focused on the troops that were arrayed in front of her. Attention! Her voice cracked, broke through the silence that filled the air like a thunderbolt, and the legion before her snapped up straight. Present arms! The legion all took out their weapons, taking various poses as one. The shaft of the spears touched the ground and was angled slightly towards the sky. Swords were brought up close to the face for more than 2 seconds before they were turned slightly and dropped to the waist. The ones who wielded bows kept their weapons sheathed and instead placed their hands over their hearts and were bowed slightly at the waist. Order arms! As her following command rang out, the troops quickly repeated the process and sheathed their weapons. Their movements were smooth and precise, a far cry from their movements outside of this. It was like their muscles, though decayed and atrophied, refused to release the past memories. Once all the weapons were sheathed, Alessia issued her following command. Officers! Forward march! In front of each formation, a single undead stepped forward and marched slowly and deliberately, at least until Alessia told them to stop. Inspect arms! Her voice bore no hesitation and was issued harshly. It made me think back to the conversation I had with Karen previously about how the Praetorian Guard grew as strong as they were. But now I know. Judging by how quickly and efficiently Alessia was belting out commands, I guess she is relentless. Even though they were undead, I felt pity for them. As one, the presented officers quickly drew their weapons and repeated the process that I saw early, only this time, they extended the weapon out slightly and never dropped it down to their hips. The Empress stepped forward, leaving Nyx behind with Alessia. She strode forth to the first officer, who remained still. With movements, like a loving mother, she reached forward and knocked away some of the dirt that had built up on his uniform. Though the overall state of the outfit would be considered unacceptable, I don't think she minded all that much. Once she was finished, she looked over the weapon before moving on to the next. With each officer, she treated them much like a mother would. Dusting off the uniform where she could and adjusting what was left were slightly skewed. It was something that most of the ruling class would never consider doing. In fact, I can't even remember a time when any noble has so directly interacted with any of their lesser officers. Looking back and thinking about her words, I should have expected her to do something like this. Alessia stepped forward once more and belted out more commands as she finished up. Port arms. The officers quickly reacted and presented their swords once more. This time, placing them in front of their face, close enough to kiss the hilt, before they rested the blades on the shoulder. The spear users stood there, with the shaft touching the ground, and the tip, at a slight angle, with their hand on their back. A few heartbeats passed before the next order came. Order arms. As the various weapons were sheathed, Alessia issued more commands. The officers spun on their feet as smooth as flowing water and marched back to the legion, though it took a few extra steps to ensure they faced the front once more. The sheer discipline here is enough to make many of the king's commanders jealous. Cato's quiet voice teased my hearing, as his voice almost drowned by the sound of feet smashing into the ground. I replied quietly, not willing to interrupt the ceremony to any degree. Though it was true, the drill alone was as smooth as could be, and each soldier followed the command. Perhaps drills like this were commonplace in her military. No, not just commonplace. From the looks of it, they were a full-time professional force. At ease. Alessia barked at them once more, before spinning on her feet and walking towards the door at the bottom of the outlook. The two palatines kept close to the Empress and her daughter as she walked towards the door before they vanished into the depths. How many kingdoms do you think can field multiple full-time armies and not go bankrupt? Few. Maybe more if they required you to have your own arms and armor. Only in times of war do most kingdoms worry about constantly having a large army at their disposal. Cato's voice sounded grim as he took in the troops standing before us. Before, we just saw them as mobs, something to kill for money and experience. But now, we see them for what they were for. These were warriors. The silence was still thick in the air as we waited for the next part of the inauguration, which thankfully didn't take all that long. The Empress emerged from shadows that seemed to cling to her like a newborn. She walked over to the railing and nodded towards Karen, who gave her a bow before he glided over to one of the chairs. Warriors of Asteria, honored delegates, I thank you for coming today. Many of you are no doubt curious why I have you seated before one of my legions. She paused, and I felt her eyes as they passed over me. I am sure that many of you may be filled with worry and doubt that my legions will be fielded to claim your lands as my own. But fear not. She leaned forward and grabbed onto the railings. These honored warriors of Asteria have a different purpose. As does this celebration. Her voice was soft now, and her gaze much less severe than before. Her gaze left us and focused on the undead that had gathered before us. Warriors of Asteria, for years, we have sat here, clinging to the remnants of what we once were. We have fought, and we have bled. Many of us have been losing hope. Though in our darkest of hours, a hero has come to aid us. She pushed away and gestured towards the shadows in the overlook, and a foreboding presence filled the air. It was heavy and smothering and seemed to cling to every inch of me. Lightning flashed through the sky, and thunder split the air as a set of grey eyes broke through the darkness flashing, much like the lighting above. My warriors, I present to you, Octavian Varus. The legions reacted to that name, not in rage but in excitement. Spears were slammed into the ground. Swords bashed into the shields, and the metallic screams of happiness filled the air until the Empress rose her hand, silencing them. From the shadows, a man, impossibly large, emerged. His size was greater than that of the beastkin that sat nearby. His muscles were taut, threatening to tear through his pristine uniform. Around him, the air rumbled, and the sky seemed to bellow, returning a hero. He strode forth, arriving next to the Empress. He looked over the legions that stood before him, his scared face before turning to us. Though he radiated an impossible power, in his face was sadness. But not just any sadness. This was a man's face who looked as if he had lost everything. He closed his eyes as he gripped the railing. The sheer bulk of his grey hands quickly encircled the stone railing. Droplets of water rained from the sky and landed gently on the giant of a man. Trails ran gently down the well-scarred flesh of Octavian's face as the rain started to pour even harder. For a few brief seconds, his eyes remained shut. But once he opened them, the sadness that I had witnessed vanished and was replaced by a righteous fury that seemed to burn away the water that had graced his decrepit flesh. Things were about to get very interesting. For years, I've served Asteria, and I have given everything to her in those many years. My time, my future, and above all else, my life. His words were like the thunder that rent the sky. Now, I stand before you to give even more. He clenched the railing as he steadied himself. Even in death, duty never ends. For a short time, he didn't speak again. He just stood there as emotions seemed to flicker across his face, many of which were just obscure. Though my status as War Master has been restored, I'm afraid that the only thing I can feel is shame. We are but a shadow of what we once were. The vile mortuary cult has laid low our vaunted motherland. Once upon a time, Asteria was once a shining star. But now. His words were caught in his throat at the mention of that. But now, look at us. We became the very thing that we swore to destroy. The soldiers gazed up at him, unflinching and uncaring, which was expected. They were undead, after all. But, really, watching this all unfold made me realize just how little I knew about the fall of Asteria. To me, it's always been a distant topic, only hinted at. The only person who seemed alive enough was Calixa. But seeing this monstrous man muse over it made me ask more questions. But now, here we are. Standing once more because of our Empress' sacrifice. Were it not for her, we would be mindless slaves. No better than the feral that roams the outlands cursed to a foul existence. He stood up straight, and the righteous fire that enshrouded him seemed to burn hotter. The air crackled, and thunder roared as the rain poured harder. But now, here we are. We may be a shadow of what we once were, but our vengeance is strong. In a week, we will march from this stronghold and tear the necromancers from the thrones they crafted from the bones of our empire. We will run them from our homes and hound them every step. There will be no mercy, for the only repentance they may find will be in death. In a week, we will march to the town of White River and we reclaim the city, in the Empress' name. With each word spoken, the surrounding fire seemed to rage harder. Behind him, the air swirled and condensed. Lighting seemed to come into existence and form the visage of a monstrous skull that gazed down on all of us as Octavian's words grew in fiery passion. We will march relentlessly and unceasingly. Through the harshest of rain and the coldest of winds. We will turn the curse that was given to us into a boon as we root those that struck us down and for those who betrayed us. As he spoke, the undead went wild. With each word he spoke, the undead slammed swords into shield, and spears into the dirt. The cacophony grew in intensity as the metallic screech of boundless rage rose into the air, and for the briefest of moments, it even drowned out the storm that raged unbiddenly. Even the soldiers still patrolling the ramparts froze, drawn to the sheer passion that radiated from his speech. Even I, someone who had no direct relation to the betrayal that they felt, couldn't deny the feelings of vengeance that were sparking in my chest. His speech instilled a sense of betrayal and hatred in me, that was coiling in my chest like a viper, ready to lash out in a split second. I was getting drawn into a trance by the passionate rancor that he felt. But as the undead reached a crescendo, he rose his hand, and silence fell upon them like a blanket. But this will be difficult. His tone shifted from passion to a general talking to his men. Yet, it didn't push me away. We will face our once mighty defenses, but we will persevere. The skies will rain down fire, and the earth will erupt beneath our feet. The air will be so sharp, it will rend flesh from bone. But this is good. His words turned grim, and a sad smile crossed his face as he looked across the troops before coming to us. In his gaze, he looked as if he knew us, and he knew we could overcome what threats lay before us. Even though I wasn't one of his warriors. While we muster our forces and march against White Ridge, a separate force will muster to the north of it and will strike at the less defended rear. The fighting will be brutal as the necromancers throw everything they have at us. But we will weather the storm, as the loyalist forces from the north batter aside the slave forces. Once their shell is cracked, we will pour into the city, break the chains that bind the unwilling, and bring the souls there back into our loving embrace. Octavian's voice seemed to roll and pitch, making it seem as if he were speaking to each of us as he told us the plan. Before us stood a general, who spoke to every one of the troops. Something that very few would take the time to do. He was telling us the plan so that we would have faith in it and place our trust in the officers who would guide us. He was unifying everyone under the same plan, which alone was mesmerizing to watch. I will not lie to you, but the fighting that will unfold will be difficult. Brother will be pitted against brother, sister against sister. The necromancers will stop at nothing to staunch our advance, but I ask you not to falter. Whether you are to fight against friends or family, do not hesitate. Grant them peace from their nightmares. But do not hesitate. For at the end of it all, we will bring those responsible to justice. I felt my heart break slightly. I watched his speech, and whatever ideas that I once had of this domain fell away. These were embattled people who lost everything, and here they were, shifting through the ashes as they tried to scrape together the pieces. Cursed to an existence they didn't want, and for what? So people could have more power? I felt pity for them, but I felt vindication for what I was doing in the back of my mind. Would this be the same path my country would walk down if the ruling elite had their way? He stood on the overlook, gazing at his troops as if he were memorizing each of their faces, at least until the Empress reappeared. His bulk quickly overpowered her more petite size. War Master, every order you issue will be as if they were my own from this moment forth. All of my legions bar my personal guard are yours to command. Bring me back my people. He dropped a knee and placed his arm across his chest as she spoke. I will not fail you, Empress. He bowed his head low, yet he still dwarfed her in size, even in his smaller stature. She reached an arm out to the man and placed it on his shoulder. I know you won't. I have faith in you. Her words were motherly and kind yet held an edge of unequivocal sternness. She then spun around to look at all her troops once more. For the crusade to retake the first town, I will second a portion of my hoplites to the War Master. Let their shields break the tide that will attempt to drown you out. A portion of the warriors clad in gold stepped forward and snapped their spears up without a second to waste. I will second a portion of my vanguard, which will cut down those who attempt to staunch the flow of Asteria's return. Various portions of the warriors who stood guard around the fortress stepped forward and joined the legion that was ready for war. I will second a portion of my mages, to deter the vaunted defenses of my cities, and to break the magic that the necromancers may cast. 3 battle mages stepped forward and melded into the growing army. And finally, I will second a portion of my assassins. May their blades strike down threats seen and unseen, so my legions can reclaim what is rightfully ours. From the shadows, many figures were born, clad in living darkness and cloaks that flickered in the pouring rain. At the head of them, all was a woman, more human than spirit, yet it was clear she wasn't true either. Her hair was braided into 3 separate strands, and she was clad in a dark cloak that hung from her, hiding most of her form, barred 2 swords that hung on each hip. Her name was clad more purple than red, and I shivered slightly as I stared at her. Spectral Blade Dancer, Praetorian Commander. Then, finally, I second you, the commander of my assassins. Use her well, but bring her back unharmed. She gestured to her troops. Today, we rise once more, and in a week, we march. Praise the War Master, praise Asteria. Every soldier in the stronghold rose their voice in a cheer that rose in an ear-splitting cacophony. Even I cheered them on as the remnants of Octavian's speech flooded my veins with righteous fervor, and I genuinely hoped for the best for them. My heart beat rapidly in my chest, sending waves of heat crashing through me. Octavian's words had stirred something deep within me that had never existed before. Rage, guilt, shame, just to name a few. But each burned like a small blazing star. I strode over to my chair, sat next to Karen, and cleared my throat. The sound of my military cheering quickly drowned me out. Karen, I'm scared. My words were but a whisper compared to the sound of rain slamming into the ground and the cries of my legions. Don't be mistress. The domain is yours, and it will never harm you. As if he were like my grandfather, he reached out and placed his hand on my shoulder, trying to reassure me. Truly, I was scared. Lately, the thoughts that were alien to me were brimming to the surface, guiding my hand. While the thoughts alone didn't really scare me, it was the thought that I would lose my memories. I didn't want to lose who I was. Maybe I just need to take a vacation and get away for a few days. It should help. Of course, I will happily take care of everything while you are away. All work and no play speed along the descent into madness. I chuckled slightly at his words, my mind filling in the quote. But he was right. I was spending way too much time working. Perhaps a few days' rest would be nice. He gave me a slight nod as he stood up, pushed himself away from the chair, and walked towards the overlook. My eyes, however, drifted towards the map that now hovered on my screen. Mostly, the speech was over, so I could relax a bit more and hopefully get my mind off of things. Vacation was something that I rarely considered, but it was something that I knew I needed. I'm so thankful for Karen, though. Him doing what he did made things so much easier. He was vastly intelligent and did so much to carry everything around here. Though everything he did seemed to be subdued. A gentle push here and a nudge there. Each one stacked up and helped push things onto a course that I didn't expect. But each time something unfolded, it was much to our benefit. Without him, I would be so lost. Once I was back from my mini vacation, I would let him rest for some time, taking on some of his share of stuff. I cast one more glance over to the delegates and looked them over once more before going back to what I was working on. Most of them seemed to be human. The most interesting out of the bunch was a giant furry creature that looked much like a minotaur, which was excellent. I've scantly seen anything non-human since I've arrived outside of that elf. Sadly, I didn't see too much of her, though I know she came back recently. But that really isn't my field, so it's not like it matters too much. In fact, I told him that as long as I wasn't directly involved with the curse breaking, I didn't really care what happened. Though I wish I had spoken with her. The only other being that caught my eye was the strange-looking woman. She reminded me of Nyx with the scales, though it was hard to see everything at this distance. The only thing that was strange to me was a sense of familiarity with her. Which was strange considering that I had never seen her before in my life. The rest, well, didn't really strike my fancy. The last one in there that I had any sense of familiarity with was Redrick, who had finally moved away from my shit list. I suppose I should be the one to finish the inauguration, but Karen can manage it. Public speaking isn't something that I enjoyed doing, yet it needed to be done. But I'm sure that he could carry it better than I could. Without thinking about it further, I tore myself away from listening to the speech threatening to draw me further in and instead glanced at the slowly forming map. I've expanded the next part of the domain a few times in the last few days as I tried to get ready for the crusade that Octavian wanted to launch. The best part is that I don't have to worry about making immediate expansion plans, mostly since I can bog them down in certain places, keep the stall going, and use the essence I earn to further increase the size of the next portion. Thankfully, the veterans stationed in that area have been working night and day, so progress has been coming along smoothly. That's not to mention the sheer amount of troops I've been creating there for them to train. My eyes drifted from the map and back towards the speech that Karen was wrapping up. Honored delegates, we appreciate you coming to the inauguration of War Master Octavian, for such an event has been rare throughout our history. Even now, at least to me, his words were monotonous, yet they tugged at me, drawing me back in. Were this in better times, it would be far more extravagant. But, we make do. He paused as he glanced across at everyone that was arrayed before him. For the next week, our forces will prepare for a crusade across Asteria. While we understand our unique circumstances with everyone involved, we ask that the stronghold be avoided at all costs, as anyone who ventures forth will be dealt with immediately. However, any of our soldiers that roam outside of the stronghold will still be considered entities of combat, and can be interacted with freely. As he spoke, I nodded my head and thought it over. Over the past few days, I've been pushing our situation as a beneficial synergy with the invaders. They help us grow more robust, and we help them grow stronger, though I've carefully orchestrated everything under the guise of a treaty to keep everyone from wandering out. I also forced all soldiers to follow something akin to the Geneva Convention when it came to combat, which should hopefully sway things slightly in my favor. Now, if any of you would like to speak with me, I will happily entertain you in the main building, where refreshments will be served. He motioned towards a few of the soldiers positioned by the entrance to the visitors' overlook. Please follow the security team, and they will ensure that you arrive there safely. My eyes wandered from the speech once more as I glanced back at my map, and a quiet sigh escaped from my lips. I definitely need a small vacation. I glanced over towards Octavian and gave him a nod. Now that his grand reveal is done, he can join his troops and get them up to par. All that was really left now was for me to head back to my office and relax. But first, I need to retrieve my daughter and Alessia. A few hours later. Mother, what do you think of this? Nyx passed a hastily drawn picture of a backpack to me. I took the paper from her, looked it over, and mentally chuckled at it, though I knew my drawing wasn't better than hers. I like it. Though, do you want one strap or two? I put it on the desk and interlaced my fingers as I regarded her. Her silver-hued skin glimmered in the warm light, and a gleeful grin was plastered across her face. I think two will do well. She leaned forward in her chair, both hands on the seat. I nodded, and I picked up a pen to further inspect her drawing. It was just a standard backpack, but with many pockets. Too many if you ask me, so I'll cut them down when I make it for her. What color do you want it to be? What's your favorite color, Mother? She rocked back and forth on her seat in excitement at her coming gift. My heart fluttered in my chest as a smile crept across my face. Lately, I found myself enjoying treating her like a daughter. It all felt so right, and I wasn't complaining. No, don't base this off of me. Tell me what color you enjoy. I was attempting to push her in her own direction since she had a tendency to copy me. But I wanted her to be her own person. Which was also why I'll be sending her to classes with Alessia and Karen. So at least she can talk to other people besides me. Perhaps I could even get her to train with Octavian before he leaves. She pouted at me as she crossed her arms. But mother. She drew out her words, trying to sway me to her side. I want this to be special to you, not me, so pick your own color. I could have been harsher, but I wanted this to be her own choice. Besides, if I was meaner about it, she would shut down on me. Fine. I enjoy black then. She pouted once more, but her excitement overwhelmed her annoyance. I nodded my head as I glanced at the backpack and formed it in my mind. I took out a few of the pockets that she had marked down and instead increased the amount of space that she would have. There would be 3 main pockets on this bag that were tiered from the largest to the smallest, and I would add a few pockets on the side for her. With but a snap of my finger, a black backpack formed on my desk. Did you design the room that you wanted yet? I shifted the subject before her sheer excitement could destroy the chair she was sitting on. Oh, yes, mother. She opened up the notebook that I made for her to use and quickly flipped to one of the pages, revealing a small room with a bed that sat in the corner and a desk next to it. It was a bit droll, so I would have to create a few things for her, like posters and some other forms of entertainment. Things that I never really considered before. Oh, the joys of motherhood. Come on, Nix, you have to wake up for school. I prodded my sleeping daughter and glanced at my clock. It was going on at 7 in the morning, and I wanted her to get up so she could go learn with Karen today. I felt a little bad for waking her up so early, but I wanted her to become a well-adjusted member of society, and by society, I mean Asteria. But mother, 5 more minutes. She murmured as she nestled further into the blankets. No, I want you to wake up now. Karen will be preparing for the class, and I don't want you to make him wait. Get up now. I stood over her and crossed my arms. I was trying to decide how far I should go to wake her up. If anything, I would yank the blanket off of her if she refused to listen, or I could be like my dad and flip the bed. But that seems kind of mean, so I would wait and use that as a last resort. She groaned as she sat up and wiped away her bleary eyes. I don't want to go. Well, you need to. He can teach you things that I can't. Besides, it will do you well to learn how to use magic and protect yourself. I leaned against the door frame, crossed my arms, and regarded my daughter, who was still trying to wake up. She was such a heavy sleeper at times. It was like she was dead to the world. But Mom, I want to stay home. She set her arms down on the fluffy black blanket I made for her and gazed up at me with a pair of puppy dog eyes. No, not allowed. Get up. I snapped my fingers as I tried to hurry her along, and I walked across her room towards one of the small wardrobes on the corner. I quickly rummaged through it, bringing out some clothes I had made for her. The dress she wore first was pretty, but I wanted her to wear something else for once. I found some clothing to work out for her, a pair of black leggings and a tank top, matched with a thin black jacket. I quickly folded them and put them into her backpack and then sorted through the clothes once more and found her a short black dress that I knew she would like. The fabric was soft under my fingertips and felt much like silk. I envied the girl for having such nice clothing, but it didn't bother me. I wasn't a fan of wearing overly extravagant clothing. But I wasn't about to berate her about it. She seemed to enjoy it, which was all that mattered to me. I gathered all her underwear that she would need and the rest of the dress. I heard the soft sound of feet hitting stone, and I spun around with her clothing in hand. Here you go. Get dressed. I pushed the clothing into her hands before she could even reply. I was excited for her. Yet, it felt like she was growing up so fast. With that done, I decided I would give her some privacy and left. I glided down the hall, humming to myself as I left her room and walked to my office. Today was going to be a good day. I was going to see her off to her classes, and then I would spend the day relaxing. Though I had no idea what I wanted to do yet. I had a bottle of wine I could crack into. So maybe while I had time, I could get a buzz going. I just didn't want to do it with Nix here. Something about being drinking around her really bothered me, and I didn't want to be that sort of parent. I waltzed into my office, sat down in my chair, and closed a few of the notebooks I had laid open, though I made sure that the pages were marked. I was only going to be gone for a day or two, but I didn't want to risk losing anything that I was working on. Without a second thought, I fell back into my chair and stared at the ceiling as I tried to clear my mind until I heard Nix walk in. Mother, how do I look? She walked into my office wearing the dress I picked out for her. It was a silken black outfit that went down to her knees. I made entirely the hem of her lace dress that rose 3 centimeters before it meshed back with the rest of the fabric. A few buttons covered by a thin patch of fabric were down the center of the dress. The sleeves extended to her wrists and flared outwards like freshly bloomed rose petals. She wore her hair in loose waves that stretched down and brushed against the textured collar of her dress. Beautiful. A grin crept across my face once more as I stared at her, which elicited a giggle as she spun around. Her dress caught the air and seemed to hover as it tried to catch up to her. Well, of course. I am a princess, after all. Don't let that go to your head. I forced my grin to become a slight smirk as I stood up and walked over to her. Do you have your bag? Your notebooks and pens? Workout clothing? The words poured out of my mouth as I tried to think of everything she would need for school, as my motherly instinct kicked into overdrive. Yes, mother. I have everything. She huffed at me as I came over to her and smoothed out some wrinkles in her dress, which quickly caused her to struggle. Mother, stop. She tried to pull away from me as I quickly fixed everything I saw. Sorry, just making sure you look as pretty as possible. I pulled away from her and looked her over one last time. Are you ready? Of course. She reached down, picked up her backpack, and threw it onto her shoulders in one graceful movement. I flicked open my map and quickly found Karen at the stronghold. Ordinarily, I would never let Nyx go there alone, but considering that the place was packed full with my guard, and not to mention Karen, I could rest easy. Everyone knows not to touch the stronghold, for now at least. I placed my hand on her shoulder and teleported away. The stronghold was as busy as usual. The walls were being expanded outwards and upwards, and everyone was busy training, at least the new legion was. A part of me was sad seeing how far away this place was from my original dream, but the other part of me didn't mind it. It filled me with a sense of comfort and a sense of familiarity. I grabbed Nyx's hand as I walked across the courtyard. The various soldiers here saw me, stopped what they were doing, and saluted in my direction, which I returned with a curt nod. Nyx, on the other hand, seemed to bask in the attention. I walked up the steps that led into the main building. The zombie on the right saw me and quickly pushed the door open for me. I thanked the zombie as I pushed Nyx into the main hall. There were soldiers from both legions all around us that were mingling with one another, though if they were talking, I had no clue. I still couldn't understand most of what they said. Nyx skipped along happily as we pushed further into the main building, which was being expanded upon. Considering the sheer amount of undead here, construction was getting hammered out at a staggering rate. I just had to monitor resources since they burned through them like paper. I flicked open the map once more to see where Karen was and saw that he was in what used to be the war room. We converted it into a classroom so we could start teaching undead magic and other various things that would be important. While the war room would be transferred to a temporary spot, at least until Octavian retook the town. I reached the double doors that marked the classroom and pushed them open, marching into the room with Nyx in hand. Karen stood behind a large podium with a large blackboard behind him. Arrayed in front of him were dozens of desks and a few undead. I could already pick out a few of my honor guards and a couple of undead from both legions. I'm glad to see them taking matters into their own hands. Ah, mistress, it's good to see you. Karen stepped away from the podium and walked over to Nyx and I. Greetings, Karen. I'm only here to make sure Nyx got here safely on her first day. I let go of her hand, and she quickly rushed over to one of the desks, sat down, and quickly rifled through her bag. I will take good care of her, mistress. Worry not. The skeleton had his hood down, revealing his bleached white bones, and his eyes were as vibrant as ever. I trust you. Would you mind keeping her for most of the day? My gaze lingered on my daughter for a moment before I tore it away. Of course. Now that I have a fleet of undead who manage the entrance, I have nothing but time. Just let me know when you are ready for her back. Thank you so much, Karen. Just let me know if she acts up. The myriad of thoughts that swirled around my head made me feel sad she was going to go to school now. It felt like she was growing up, yet she has only been mine for such a short time. I will do that, mistress. Enjoy your day off. He clacked his teeth together as he walked back towards the podium. Thank you, Karen. I glanced across the room and spared my daughter one last glance before teleported back to my office, eager to start my day off. It was lonely here without Nyx pestering me. Not to mention that Alessia was busy training the guard. I pulled open one drawer on my desk and went through it to grab the wine bottle I had tucked away. Now that Nyx wasn't here, I could enjoy it. I set the bottle on the desk and looked it over. The light pushed through the blood-red liquid, casting a sanguine light on my desk. I ran my fingers across the cool glass as I tried to decide if I wanted to grab a cup or not. It wouldn't be the first time I've thrown back a bottle of wine without it. After much deliberation, I decided I would go without one. I grabbed the small knife on my desk and quickly chipped away the hard wax seal. When I first saw this, I was shocked. I've always seen wine bottles with a cork, but rarely with wax. But I quickly adapted and learned how to carefully remove the wax without crumbling it and letting it fall into the bottle. Once the wax was removed and the lip of the bottle cleaned off, I brought it to my lips and sipped it. I know that the aroma of the wine was vital to the taste, but honestly, at this moment, I couldn't bring myself to care. It's been so long since I've had something like this. The liquid rushed into my mouth and quickly met my tongue. The liquid was thick, and at first, it teased me with a soft buttery taste that attacked the center of my tongue. But quickly, the taste shifted into something sweet that melted into a faint smoky taste as I swallowed. I pulled the bottle away from my lips and gazed at the bottle of wine as a ball of warmth traveled down my throat. Oh, this was dangerous. I gulped down another mouthful of the delicious liquid, and a hiccup left my mouth shortly after. My world swam slightly as I set the bottle down. Warmth coursed through my body with each pulse of my heart, and my entire body buzzed slightly. I giggled for no real reason as I rested my head against the cool wood of my desk. Ah yes, it's been so long since I've been like this. Empress, are you alright? Alessia's voice tore through my drunken stupor, and I sat up. A lazy grin grew across my face as I stared at her. Alessia! The words tore through my mouth as I hastily stood up, almost knocking my chair back as I rushed over to her. I threw my arms around her and pulled her into a tight hug. Tentatively, a set of hands rested against my back as I nestled into her chest. Usually, I wouldn't do something like this, but I'm a needy when drunk. What's going on with you? Alessia asked as I pushed away from her and grabbed her hand. I've had a bit to drink, so I'm just vibing now. I pulled her over to my desk, the alcohol driving my actions, though I'm sure it's just as much as me as it was what I had to drink. Maybe it wasn't. Who knows? I sat down on the chair since standing seemed to be too much of a hassle at the moment. I quickly wrapped my arms around Alessia's waist, rested my head against her stomach, and closed my eyes. I felt a hand rest against my head for a split second before fingers ran through my hair. The warmth in my chest grew a little more as I hugged her tighter, but the coolness that radiated from her stood in stark contrast to the warmth that pulsed within me, which only caused me to bury myself further into her. But that only caused the heat to grow in intensity. You are as bad as Nyx. In my drunken stupor, her voice seemed to roll teasingly, causing me to chuckle, but I lost my retort just as fast as it came. Alessia, you are so pretty. I craned my head upwards to stare at her. Her white and silver hair looked more and more corporeal with each passing day. Her golden eyes were soft now and gazed at me with such adoration it made my stomach jump. A smile flickered across her face as she rested her hands against my cheeks. A quiet giggle escaped from my lips as I rested my hands against hers. I'm glad you think so, Empress. I frowned slightly as I judged her words. You can call me Calixa, you know. You don't always have to be so formal with me. She shook her head and shifted her right hand down under my chin, tilting my head up slightly towards her. I would never. You will always be Empress to me. She gazed at me and looked as if she wanted to say something more, but she stopped. I felt my heart jump slightly before it settled, and I quickly tore my gaze away from her, slightly frightened by what I was feeling. Come on, Plessis. I drew my words out as I pouted. I could make her if I wanted to, but that wouldn't be right. I wanted it to be of her own choice. But for some reason, I really just wanted her to say my name. No. I will only call you Empress. I heard her chuckle for the first time, and it sounded like the most beautiful thing I've ever heard. Finny. I shrugged, wrapped my arms around her waist, and nestled my head into her stomach. A nagging sense of disappointment ate away at the euphoria that flooded my veins, and honestly, I didn't know why. I guess the energy that radiated from me changed because Alessia shifted and put her hand under my chin, and tilted my face up. I will only call you Calixa this one time. As my name left her lips, the heat quickly swam to my cheeks. I stammered for just a second as my mind short-circuited before I decided to just shut my mouth. Oh, what's this? At a loss for words, are we? She wiggled her eyebrows at me, and I turned my head away. I was thoroughly on the defensive now, and I didn't know what to do. Alessia, wanna play some games with me? I pushed away from her as I tried to force away the feeling in my chest. I stood up and staggered over to another part of my office like a drunken sailor, in an attempt to escape from the situation that I was now in. Really, there was no one to blame here but myself.